Hi, I'm Pastor Emily, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs.
And I'm Pastor Kay, and my pronouns are she, her.
And we are Nerds at Church, a queer and feminist podcast diving deep into nerdery and the Bible.
We've got deep dives on everything from the Big Bang, glitter, and a whole series on bread, to Paul, transfiguration.
Yes, that's about our trans experiences.
And a whole series on forgiveness, plus much more.
Whether you're a Trekkie or a bookworm, a comics fan or a science nerd, or even a historical costumer or artist, we've got connections for you.
And Emily has some thoughts on lembas bread.
It's amazing, okay?
If you've ever read a Bible story and thought, this story could use a Muppet, we've got the perfect segment for you too.
Nerds at Church releases Monday mornings on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you catch your podcasts.
As the ancient Christians said,
Pax Vobiscum.
Greetings and happy Halloween. You are listening to Horror Nerds at Church, a ridiculously queer podcast where we take a deep dive into a horror film or a book, or both in this case.
Ooh, spooky.
Right. And we talk about how it connects to queerness, religion, and theology. My name is Pace, and I am the split pea soup that was used for some of the special effects in this film.
Oh my gosh, that is what it looks like.
It is actually what it is indeed. Split pea soup.
It was split pea. I guess you don't want something in her mouth that tastes actually bad. And I'm Pastor Emily, and I am the Emily yet to appear. I don't know if I don't know if Emily Rose, the exorcism of Emily Rose, is actually in any way tied to The Exorcist, but in my head,
yes and no,
it is.
It all connects. Yeah. And I am the guest today, TJ Tranchell, and I am the astronaut doomed to die during space travel.
Right? Oof.
That's unfortunate.
We'll talk about it, I'm sure.
I'm sure we will. I'm sure I missed that part. I didn't read the... Oh, it's my turn. I may have already taken my shots for later in the episode because it's late at night here. Anyway, for those of you just listening to this, you are welcome to follow us on Patreon at patreon.com/horrornerdsatchurch for the video of today's episode and to meet my beholder named Dave. It starts at only $5 to sign up, and you get exclusive access to hours of bonus content, including BooTube episodes about TV shows, movie commentaries, bonus episodes, video recordings of the episodes, and more.
Yep, and I forgot to switch my camera around, so right now it's mirrored, but if I didn't...
No, I can see it fine.
Oh, you can? Okay, so it's just showing up for me mirrored, but I have my Everything Hurts and I'm Dying shirt, which is a quote from Parks and Recreation, and this shirt was made by Adam Ellis, artist guy, but I feel like this is a very appropriate shirt for this movie.
I feel like mine is also appropriate in that it is Ray Gun from Iowa in response to some Iowa things. And it says, I will believe, support, advocate.
Ooh,
I don't know if you have a show.
Are we showing off
Sure,
shirts?
do it.
I gotcha.
Ooh, very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Redbubble purchase.
I love it.
I dig it.
Sorry.
Yeah, so this is just a sneak peek for, or this is a, what should I say? Yes, for those of you who are not Patreon supporters who can only hear us, this is intentionally designed to make you feel envious and give us money and join Patreon, so you can see the shirts that we are all showing off. But for today's special extra-length Halloween episode, we will be talking about the 1971 novel The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, the 1973 film The Exorcist, which celebrates its 50th anniversary this year. And so because it's turning 50 this year, we will be talking about the movie, the book behind the movie, and of course our deep dive into queer and theological aspects of the film. And we are joined again by TJ Tranchell. Thank you so much for joining us. This is so
I'm
fun.
happy to be here.
You literally wrote books on exorcism. So like this is so exciting.
I love when I get to have guests where I can say, you literally wrote a book on it.
Right?
I did.
Um,
It's pretty exciting.
So TJ Tranchell is the author of 5 books, including the possession novel Tell No Man, which I have right here. So you all should go out and buy a copy of this. It's really good. And Cry Down Dark, which the New York Times called the scariest book set in Utah.
That's saying something, because I lived in Utah for a year, and
it's a scary place.
Right. And he also wrote about the 2 prequels to The Exorcist for the April 2022 issue of Fangoria, which I'm also displaying for Patreon. And
that was fun.
Yeah, it is so cool. It's so cool to like actually know someone like personally who wrote for Fangoria. I just have to say, it's my claim to fame is through you, TJ. My horror claim to fame.
Hey, whatever works. It feels good for me to know somebody, right. And it just happens to be me.
Right.
What is Fangoria for those of us not in the know? Not that that's me or anything. 100% it's me.
Fangoria is the #1 American magazine for horror films, specifically.
I thought it was
started in 1979, had a brief hiatus, came back in 2018, just in time for the new Halloween series, and has been a little bit of an up and down roller coaster with some different people, but it is going strong. And it's a quarterly now, so it's always really big.
Yeah. Quarterlies are wonderful. My seminary
I think it works out for this magazine in particular. So
yeah,
they're great.
Maybe later I'll tell you how I got that gig, because it's a pretty fun story.
That sounds delightful.
And for those of you listening, you can go to Fangoria and pick up back issues, fangoria.com. I am being the nerd I am, of course, the horror nerd I am, a subscriber, so I get the special subscription covers, which is a benefit for those of you who subscribe. But
fancy
that's all besides the point. The point is, though, if you're interested in The Exorcist, and especially the abysmal prequels, this is a really good article. I loved it. So
the abysmal prequels, well, that makes me excited.
Yeah, it's for when we cover them in a future season. Yes, we will.
When you're a completist, you have to watch them.
It's true. I was like, I can't even say anything. I literally did an entire season on Twilight, of which you were our guest. Like, that's how I got onto this podcast, was Twilight. So
everyone listening, go back if you missed that episode and listen to it also.
Yes. Sure. It's fantastic, especially if you're curious about the ways that LDS theology and culture influence the first movie in particular. That was TJ's guest episode. And every time I talk about that season, I mention you and your like insights, and
not even just a season.
It was a lot of fun.
Like anytime I send out an inquiry to somebody who I want to guest on the podcast, I include a list of sample episodes to listen to, and that's always one of the ones I include because it's such a good conversation. So.
It's true.
Thank you.
Oh, I didn't finish the last part of your bio. So in case you want to know where TJ lives, he lives in Washington State with his wife and son and teaches English at a community college. Mm-hmm. So welcome back.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So a few announcements before we get into this. Number 1, our pet costume contest, by the time this airs, has concluded. But we will have a live announcement of the winner. Probably not today, or maybe today. Well, it depends. We need to figure it out. So our hope is that we have it today.
We can do it today. What day is the 31st? That's a
It's a
Tuesday.
Tuesday, but the problem is I have a concert in the evening. So I'd have to do it during the day. Yeah, I'm seeing Tool. How can you not see Tool on Halloween when they're playing in your area?
I don't know who that is.
It's okay.
It's banned.
Yes.
I mean, I think that much. I think we can do it on the 31st. So if you're hearing this the day it airs, check our socials because I don't have anything scheduled that day.
Cool. So it might be earlier, like an early afternoon live
Yeah.
announcement.
I think that would be perfect.
Yeah. Let's do it. Okay, so you're hearing it here first. Well, maybe
probably not actually.
because we probably will post about it on social
You're
media.
hearing it here last.
Yes, you're hearing
but
it here
we're
last.
recording it here first. TJ's hearing it first.
Right?
Woo, lucky me.
So you'll get.
My cats won't wear costumes, so
Aw.
they're not in it.
That's unfortunate. Are either of them black?
2 out of the 3 are.
You could just dress them up as Bix
Binks.
from Hocus Pocus.
Hocus Pocus. Or Salem.
We had a previous black cat whose name was Binks.
Binks.
So,
That's fantastic.
So yeah, congratulations to our winner, which we will know at the time this episode drops, but we do not know yet.
Yeah.
But thank you all for your support, for voting, all the fun stuff. We love seeing your pets. This is one of the highlights of doing the podcast is the annual pet costume contest.
I will always wear proudly the mantle of having won the first one with not a pet, but a plant.
Yes.
Little Basil Shop of Horrors it was.
And they went on to be, their prize was becoming the co-host of the podcast. That's not actually what happened, but
that's
it's
not
kind
how
of
it
funny.
works. But we might make you a guest. I don't know.
Maybe. Something.
We got lots of other great prizes, so.
Yes. So the other announcement is season 6 on Star Wars and Alien is tentatively scheduled to start in January. We took our long break and hiatus from covering movies because of the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. They are in various states of resolving with some complications and ongoing issues. So who knows what will happen
producers
in the next few months.
are assholes and want to take people's images and use them forever. And that is what we call shitty.
Yes.
Very much.
So, yes, but we are still very SAG-AFTRA strong, very WGA strong, and our...
WGA won.
Right? So we...
That was my desk.
But yeah, so we're still kind of playing it a little bit by ear as to when our Star Wars and Alien season starts, but look forward to January. That's where we are thinking right now.
Mm-hmm.
We have... this is our... Okay, for those of you listening, this is our 99th full-length episode.
Dun, dun, dun.
So not counting the minisodes, but like our full-length episodes, this is number 99. So Emily and I realized this accidentally about a week ago. So we are still figuring out what we're going to do for our 100th episode special in November. We're thinking maybe a live thing, inviting some former podcast guests and stuff on to help with that but definitely what we're going to do is a Q&A as part of this, which will be a live Q&A, so you can ask questions live, but you can also submit your questions ahead of time by emailing us at horrornerds@church, and we'll answer almost all of your questions. If we only get like 2, we'll probably answer all of them.
All of them, depending on the appropriateness of them.
Yes. So we'll see.
We reserve the right to not answer, but probably we're going to answer.
Yes. Pace notoriously overshares for everything, so.
I literally have a TikTok series right now called Sabbath Sips with a bunch of queer people. It gets, I just like that my bishop really doesn't pay attention for the most part.
And
anyway.
Skogan, if you're listening to this, please feature us on your website.
Oh my gosh, that would be great. Dan Skogan for Eel Save is like within the Lutheran Church, a guy that like got kicked out of the ELCA well, got kicked out of candidacy because he was not fit to be a pastor and is pissed about it. And so if you ever want to, I don't actually want it to encourage anybody to go to Exposing the ELCA, but if you want to be encouraged by the state of the church, particularly the Lutheran church, it's a great place to go because he like rails against particularly pastors and clergy for things that I'm like, yeah, I'm so glad we're doing that.
Right?
And he's pissed about it. It's fantastic.
It's fun. It's kind of like a who's who of the cool people in the ELCA. He thinks it's like the death of the church, but it's really cool.
Yeah.
And then the last announcement I have,
the most important of the most important
is happy birthday, TJ, since this episode is dropping on your birthday.
Woohoo! Do we need to sing happy birthday?
Nope.
44. I made it to that far.
Nice.
Also, how fitting for a like this brings up questions of fate and destiny and all sorts of things that you of all people would be born on Halloween.
You know, it does. It is interesting. I don't have the answer.
Which came first?
Fate.
Your birth. I know.
I mean, technically, Halloween came first.
Well, that's true.
Really? Halloween is much older than
I thought Halloween's only been around for like 35 years. What are you talking about?
That would make me older than Halloween, but we know
that makes me older than Halloween.
Me as well.
That'd be hilarious. Anyway, speaking of you and the wonderfulness that is you and the gratefulness we are to, you know, the what happened 44 years ago next week, except this week, today, timey-wimey. We, as you know, TJ, generally have our guests share a real-life church horror story. And this can be a supernatural horror story. It can be a church people being shitty horror story. It can be anything between or beyond. Do you have one that you could share with us?
Well, I believe in the Twilight episode, I shared the story of the potential exorcism experienced by my mother. So y'all have to go back and listen to that to get that story. But since then, I haven't necessarily had any more fun supernatural church horror stories, which is kind of a shame. Like I'm always looking for that. Right. Like, something else happen. Yeah. No. But last summer 22, maybe earlier time. But I was at a men's breakfast at the church that my wife and I were attending at the time, and it was right after the new Roe versus Wade decision. Ooh. It was not a good time to be in a room full of church men, unfortunately. And the perspective on it was super uncomfortable as that decision being a good thing. Oh. And so I was on my guard, just like, I could tell in this room, I'm the only person who thinks that this is bad. Yeah. And then somehow that conversation shifted into some horribly transphobic things being stated, because it opens the door, right? Oh, we could say this, we could say that.
Once you have a say of bodily autonomy for one group of people, you think you can say it whatever you want about anything.
Yeah. And so that combined with a few too many Let's Go Brandon t-shirts worn during services, my wife and I bailed. We went, nope, we're out.
Yeah. Oh.
And so the good news, though, is that we found a new church which clearly states that they are more understanding, but are still in a place of struggling to be like, well, what are we supposed to do? Which is much more interesting, because then we get to have these much more open conversations.
And you get to be part of pushing them. And one thing this church
does, exactly. Yeah. One thing this church has done recently is we have Star Trek night. Ooh. You guys would love this. Y'all would love this. For a couple months now, once a month, we've gotten together and watched an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and then had these real theological and social discussions about the episodes and how a church, and specifically our church, should be taking those lessons and responding to them. And so one of our participants at the last meeting also expressed some transphobic viewpoints, and I spoke up that time. I was like, no, that's not the point here. You can't just instantly blame a group of people, generalized group of people that you don't even know for problems that don't exist.
Yeah.
And thankfully, it was a much more supportive place to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And it's ongoing.
Yeah.
So it's ongoing. It's not, doors in that area aren't slammed shut. Will I reach that specific person? Probably not. Will other people in that group who I know are dealing with those issues on a more personal level feel hopefully a bit more comfortable and supported? Good.
Yeah.
That's
That's
what
what it's
after.
really about. Like,
Yeah.
there are people who we will never reach, and the engagement with them is about all of the bystanders, all of the people who
Yep.
are listening and watching and hoping for someone who is willing to speak up. So, yeah.
Yep. So I did. And, honestly, it was actually kind of the first church opportunity that I had to really do something like that. And yeah, it was super uncomfortable for me, but also had to be done.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's what we're called to. Yeah, I preached right after the leak of the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision. I preached at a congregation called Reformation in Washington, D.C., literally steps from the Capitol. And the Washington posted a whole article and stuff. But it, I can't imagine what that was like, not only for you, but for your wife and your whole family to be all of a sudden oh, this is the church showing its stripes of really harmful
yeah,
perspectives.
it was, the church we're in really now is really great. To be a little bit more personal, my sister-in-law, uh, her and my brother have been struggling to have a baby for a long time. And she has a ton of medical conditions that have basically said she wouldn't be able to carry. And so they did an egg harvest and a bunch of stuff. And then earlier this year, she actually did get pregnant. And immediately the doctor was like, you can't carry this, you will die. And so they had to terminate, or she would die. And so it was a tough week. There was a bunch of other stuff going on. And I was telling our pastor this. Our pastors, our co-pastors, are a husband and wife who do everything equally, which is amazing.
Nice.
And she said, well, at least they're in Washington. And I said, no, actually they're in Utah.
Oh.
And so it was,
Ooh.
a fine line.
Yeah.
They were at a month instead of the 6 weeks and the 12 weeks and all that. So they were at a month of known. So it's
Yeah.
close. So it was very scary.
Yeah. There's so much harm. I have sirens happening in the background. Not sure if you can hear it, but there's just so much harm that we do because we stop seeing people as people and as human beings worth care and respect and bodily autonomy. And it's just how do you not see how this impacts? And it's just there's a lack of care at a certain point. But ugh, yeah, I'm glad that.
Which thankfully all ties in because bodily autonomy issues are right in here
Oh yeah,
in The Exorcist.
it's true. I have a whole little segment on that because, well, a little whatever it is. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I should have said this earlier too. That reminds me, weirdly, the bodily autonomy piece because of our season 2 episode where we interviewed Richard Lindsay. We ended up talking about The Exorcist briefly, not very much, but that was one of the issues that came up heavily in that conversation. And I know we're going to get into it again, but just to go back and listen to that episode if you want some more Exorcists, if this extra length episode isn't going to be enough for you.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
But something that we just started asking uh, all the guests this season is getting at the really, really easy, straightforward question.
Super simple.
Super simple. Of what is horror? And so, the, and because we're specifically asking people who are authors, because this is our mini book season, who are horror authors, and so we're very, very interested in you as a horror and horror adjacent author, how you would define horror.
It's definitely something I think about a lot, and I might be surprised I get often asked this question, but I think horror is about confronting fear. So it's looking head on into what we are actually afraid of. And so each piece of horror media doesn't necessarily have to be scary because you can't scare everyone with the same thing. But the primary motivation should be that confrontation, that facing fear and hitting it really head on. So, like a mystery or a thriller is about solving the crime and catching the bad guy. And there might be horror elements in that. But horror itself, you might not catch the bad guy. You might not solve the mystery. You probably aren't going to have a happy ending necessarily, but you will at the very least have confronted what you are afraid of.
I love it.
I like that. And it works really well. So part of this comes out of a conversation I had at Trans Pride this year with somebody, because I was talking about our podcast and that we were going to do a series or a season on Star Wars and the Alien franchise. And they were like, Star Wars as horror? And I was like, having trouble articulating it. And part of it is we look at things through the lens of horror, right? Twilight is not actually horror, but it is horrific, right? Like,
Yeah.
we look at it through the lens of horror too, and so that part of like the motivation is confronting what we're afraid of. And I do think that in Star Wars there is a significant amount of confronting what we are afraid of, confronting whether it's confronting the dark side or like Luke confronting his father, who he doesn't know his father, and like once he knows that it's his father and like confronting him, and Darth Vader confronting having a son who is still alive, and like all of those things I think lend itself really well to this definition of horror. So I love that this is how you're explaining it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody in Star Wars is afraid of something. I mean, even Yoda says it, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, that whole thing.
Yeah.
You guys will get into it.
Yep.
For sure.
Yeah. And then pace is a super expansive definition that angers a lot of people, which is everything can be horror if you want it to be. But that goes back to that like lens of viewing how you can view horror. But I really think what you say about the heart of horror is about confronting fear is so like spot on. And so I just love that framing of it. So I guess we can move into the horrifying film we are covering today. So first we'll talk about the movie, and then we'll talk about the book, and then we'll do our theological deep dive at the end. But today's movie, The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin, came out in 1973, 50 years ago. And
on Christmas Eve. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Its first release date was Christmas Eve, 1973.
I
wow.
love it. What a day
That's
to
a
release
choice.
a film.
Yeah, it is a choice.
But it's the same year as American Graffiti, the animated Charlotte's Web, Godspell, Jesus Christ Superstar, The Long Goodbye, Martin Luther biopic with Judi Dench as Katie Luther. So I have to say that as a Luther scholar. It's not a good biopic, by the way, but that came out that year.
But it's got Dame Judi Dench in it, so how bad can it be?
I mean, pretty bad.
Is that the one with Stacy Keach? That's the one with Stacy Keach in it.
Yeah.
Okay. Remind me of that when we get to background stuff.
Okay. And then also the year of Disney's Robin Hood.
Which is the first one where it's like, I remember watching that. I've seen Jesus Christ Superstar. My mom was in Godspell in community theater, and I've read the book Charlotte's Web, but the rest of them I was like, and then I was like, Disney's Robin Hood, got it.
You weren't
Seen that one.
forced to sit through the Judi Dench Luther in confirmation as I was, because
No.
this was before the Josephine's version, which is not historically accurate either.
No, we accidentally watched a book about the Columbine shooting.
Oh.
It was called She Said Yes, and my youth director got it because he thought it was about like a marriage proposal and he was like getting engaged. And it wasn't. It was about someone literally coming into the school with a gun and then like threatening to shoot people and then asking if she believed in God, and she said yes. And yeah, that was a whole different perspective. I grew up in Colorado, so like the Columbine shooting was a lot closer to home for us than for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was our confirmation movie.
Nice. Oh
boy.
Well, what is your first memory of this film? When was the first time you saw it? Anything like that? I guess we should start with Emily, just get it over with so we can get a shot in.
My first time watching this was last week for this episode. Take your shots, folks.
I honestly don't know how you made it this long without seeing The Exorcist. Just because this
How was I supposed to see it? I have not seen most of the movies made before I was born.
It's true.
Okay, did you watch the original theatrical cut or the extended director's cut? This is important.
They would not. Emily would not know the difference.
I was gonna say, I don't know.
But yes, we watched the extended cut.
Interesting. Now I'm curious what got cut out.
The
spider walk.
Spider walk is the big one down the stairs. Maybe you're taking notes during that scene or something.
I mean, yes. I know there are scenes with stairs and people falling down the stairs.
Oh, different stairs.
No, this is stairs inside the house.
She walks backwards on all fours down the stairs. Is the big one. Oh my goodness. So we'll have to rewatch. What I'm hearing is we have to rewatch this movie now, just so Emily can watch that scene.
I mean, if we're gonna do an exorcism season, then yes, we'll rewatch it. We'll do a movie commentary or something at least.
But another difference is the ending is a little bit different, a little bit longer, and then there's also a lot more of the subliminal kind of pictures of the demon's face that kind of show up and like blink on the screen a few times.
And one of my favorite scenes isn't in the theatrical either. The more of the hall conversation with Marin and Karis. A lot of that was cut in the theatrical.
What about you, TJ? When's the first time you saw this movie?
So right before my freshman year of high school, I was in this big pageant thing about the history of the American West. And this was in northern Utah.
I was going to say, in Utah, though.
Yeah, everybody was a bunch of different characters throughout the history and all that kind of stuff. And my older sister and one of her friends were also in it. So they were essentially my ride and things like that. And so one night after rehearsal, another cast member, a guy that my sister's friend liked, invited us back to his house to watch a movie, like hang out and watch this movie.
And
specifically, he was inviting the girls, and they couldn't go without me because I wouldn't have had a ride. I would have been stuck. So I had to go.
He picked
I mean, they're teenagers.
Exorcist? I mean, I guess, like, then you're scared and you're like...
He picked The Exorcist. Wow. I don't know why.
Because scary movies are the movies where the boys pick them and then the girls are like, hold me.
These two girls were not clingy, scared girls. They were devastated.
Oh, yeah.
They were so scared.
Oh, yeah.
And I ate it up. I sat there and watched this crappy VHS copy on a tiny TV with this guy who thought he was going to have a very different night than he did. And these two high school girls just absolutely scared out of their minds.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't even the scariest part. The scariest part was driving home
Ooh.
at like 1 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
in the dark, and both of them were so freaked out that they could barely drive. I'm surprised we didn't die driving home, because it's rural Utah at that point. It's dark. There's not a lot of street lights. It's not even a freeway. It's just road. And they were so scared. And the next day they were scared. And I just, every time
Oof.
they came up, I was like, this is what I need in my life. And I've essentially been chasing that thrill of how scared they were since then.
Wow.
And so that's been 30 years.
That feels like
So
my first. This is when I stopped watching horror movies almost entirely. My first year of college, January term break, I watched Silence of the Lambs in the middle of the afternoon by myself. Never again. I've never. That was so freaky. I could not.
the only time a movie I know has scared my sister that much was her and one of my cousins. I don't know why. They went to Seven and came home just
Mm.
bone white. And of course, I said, "Well, I want to go." And I tried to go, and the stupid theater carded me, and I wasn't 17
Oof.
yet. Like, come on.
I mean, it was Iowa, so of course they were going to card you, but also.
Utah.
You know, that was actually the first time I'd been carded in a
Really?
long time. I went to The Crow and Speed in 94 again when I was like 14,
Wow.
15. Not even a problem. No, I got carded for 7.
Hmm.
Weird movie to get carded for. But I guess it
Interesting.
makes
Yeah.
sense. I mean, it's a gruesome end to that. Well, a gruesome all throughout the movie, I would say.
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
Future episode.
Yep. And yes, we will probably cover the Hannibal Lecter franchise at some point, Emily. So yeah,
That's like way down the road though, because I have to be able to watch general horror movies at night before we get to the point where I'm willing to watch Hannibal Lecter during the day again. It was like it got in my head. That is why. It got
Yeah.
in my head, and yeah, I just
It did its job.
it did. It did it so effectively. It was bad. I mean good, but bad. It was really effective.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess it's my turn then.
Yeah.
First time I saw this movie, so you can take a shot again, because I definitely saw this movie before I was 12. I don't know when I saw it.
I
For the
had a
first time.
feeling.
I mean, it's a movie that came out, a horror movie that came out in the 70s or 80s, so of course I saw it before I was 12. But, like, I honestly don't remember when I saw it for the first time. But I had seen it enough times that when the director's cut was released theatrically and I went to see it in the theaters, I was like blown. Like I knew enough of having seen The Exorcist enough times by that point that I was able to spot the differences as I was watching it along the theaters. So, but yeah, Exorcist still one of I still would rank this in like top 10 scary movies of all time. Not that I was like, I wasn't like scared. It's very hard for me, probably similar for you, TJ, to get like scared at movies. But like the
Mhm.
atmosphere of this just kind of lingers with you. It's
It
such
really
an
does.
atmosphere of the
And,
film.
you know, like a lot of horror movies, sometimes like you Emily, watching watching something alone can have a certain impact, but then watching things with a crowd or just the other audience that you're
Oh,
with,
yeah.
like I've seen all of the Paranormal Activity movies in the theater, and every single one of them, somebody has cried.
Hmm.
And so that sticks a little
Mhm.
more. Like, somebody's crying. Why? What is so horrifying going on that you are in tears? Like, and that's interesting to me. And so when something like that happens, my experience is leveled up.
Yeah.
And The Exorcist is definitely one of those movies that I think has sort of that built in. level up
Oh, it was
ability.
definitely scary. It was friend of the podcast, Susanna Porter, and I were watching it together. Well, Pace watched it also with us, but in their own space. And it was scary. Like, yeah, it was a different type of scary than a lot of the scary that we've watched on the podcast. And like, I'm a horror Padawan. I'm still like getting into it, but I like the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise has a lot of like tropes and stuff where like I know more about like who's gonna die, who's gonna live, all of that stuff. And this is a different type of horror movie.
Yes, it
Just
is.
like,
And it's a creator of tropes.
mm,
That's the other thing,
Yeah.
is that a lot of things afterward are responses to this, whereas this didn't really have anything cinematically necessarily that it was responding to, at least not um, statewide filmed
Yeah.
cinema.
Which is a great transition. Thank you, because I don't know how to transition well. To our background behind the scenes for this movie, I have a few things. I'm coming like in hot off work, so like I didn't make my extensive notes as usual. But just off the top of my head, some of the trivia about this film is that it is kind of inspired by an allegedly true story about the exorcism of Roland Doe. Roland Doe is a pseudonym. He lived in Cottage City, Maryland, which is a suburb of DC, and was
I live in Maryland.
Yep. And he was exorcised allegedly, um, according to the news stories that came out around the time. He's allegedly exorcised by a group of Jesuit priests, and there were like at least 40
Hmm.
people who witnessed the possession and the exorcism and stuff. And so that happened. William Peter Blady heard about this when he was a student at Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit school in DC, and it and hearing about it, it stuck with him. And Rosemary's Baby was also a fairly recent film at this time. I think Rosemary's Baby is 1968, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yep, 68.
So he was also kind of inspired by Rosemary's Baby and particularly the character of Rosemary as this concerned mother who's not being believed and trying to advocate for her unborn child, who she slowly finds out is a demon. So, but yeah, so uh, he was inspired by that film as well, and so decided to kind of create this novel. It came out in 1971, and it was received pretty well and was kind of initially pretty popular and making the rounds in the publishing world. And so it was not long before it was a film option was picked up, and he uh, wrote the screenplay as well. And so one of the really cool things that we'll get to as we talk a little bit about the book and the film, like some of the differences, is that this movie follows the book very closely for a lot of it. There are a few deviations, but by and large, it's a very close
Mm-hmm.
rendering of the book. But of course, since a book can do a lot better with interior lives of characters, background of characters, and stuff, a lot of that stuff was cut out. But like the action and stuff basically follows the book very well. And then he would go on to write a direct sequel to The Exorcist called Legion, which was adapted loosely into The Exorcist 3. And he also wrote an indirect kind of sequel called The Ninth Configuration, which was also released as a movie, which he himself directed and wrote the screenplay for. And The Exorcist 2, if you're wondering why that was skipped over, is because it's not based on any of his books. It's just own weird thing.
Only Patreon members saw the face I just made.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a face.
And then the other big piece of trivia I have is the alleged curse of this film. So there's been a lot of like, you'll see on Shudder or AMC Plus has this series called Curse Cinema. This documentary series that basically goes over curses, and this is the movie that's the very first episode because it has such a infamous reputation of being cursed, where there's all sorts of issues on set. One of the background actors is actually a serial killer. There's just so many weird things about this movie that kind of lead to this consideration of it being a cursed film. Lots of injuries to cast and crew. Burstyn and Blair have lasting back injuries from the shooting. We'll talk about Burstyn's a little bit in the direction because that was not great.
I don't know which actors played which
Ellen
characters.
Burstyn is the mom. Chris O'Neill. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
And then, so some other people connected to their film or their family members died during the shootings. McGowan died just a week after shooting his scenes as Dennings. And stuff like that. So all sorts of like legends
Highly
about this being a curse
suspicious.
film. Yep.
Yep. Lots of cool background stuff like that. So earlier you mentioned the film Luther Face. Luther in that film was played by Stacy Keach. Keach was actually cast before Jason Miller to play Damien Karras.
Oh, wow.
Huh.
And then William Friedkin had been in touch with Jason Miller, and Miller basically, in a lot of ways, forced his way in. And it's like, no, you just have to do a screen test, do the screen test, and you'll see. And they actually paid Keach his full salary for the film, even though he wasn't in it.
Wow.
Huh.
But Blatty cast Keach in the 9th configuration.
Oh.
So sort of made up for it a little bit. Just a little.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's interesting that both of the films came out in the same year.
Yeah. I have
But
yet to watch the full 9th configuration. I have tried at least 3 times, and each time I get bored about like 15 minutes in and I give up. And I've never read the novel either, so that is on my list to do whenever we do a full Exorcist season. We'll of course cover that since it's related to.
they're both fun in weird ways. But that's the thing about, and this is my note, Blatty had a film background. So for people who don't know, before he got popular as a novelist, Blatty was a screenwriter. In particular, he worked with Blake Edwards on the Pink Panther movies.
I used to watch the Pink Panther movies.
Yeah.
Now you're speaking
And so
my territory.
When you watch The Exorcist, and especially, and then even more in Exorcist 3, and then in the books, there's a lot of humor in them. And that is all straight from Blatty and his experience working on these comedies with Blake Edwards. And so also in The Exorcist, when you see this main character is an actress. So there's a lot of film going on. That's legit authentic stuff from Blatty, from his experience working on sets and being a part of that. So it's not just some crap some dude made up. Like, he had been through that, and the parties and the behind the scenes politics of where can we shoot and do we have to give this much money, and actors and actresses that don't like the script and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's real authentic stuff from Blatty because of that experience.
One of the characters I love, in spite of him being a cop, because of my feelings about that, but like Kinderman is such a weird, like bumbling fool character in the film. In the novel he's not quite as much, but I just love like Blatty using Kinderman as this like just talking and waxing poetic about film throughout both the book and the movie, and I just love that. Like this, like adds this richness to the character who is just like so deeply invested in what's happening in the film industry, even though he's a cop and stuff like that. So
He's a total outsider. Kinderman is us.
Huh.
We're the outsider who really, like, we get to touch the experience just a little bit, and we want to be a part of it. But he's also the funniest character. But it's not
yeah,
jokes. It's not jokes with punchlines. It's just funny because of anecdotes and his experience. Um, the issue with putting a carp in a bathtub, because Kinderman's Jewish. Kinderman's a Jewish character,
Mm.
which also is interesting. And so he, in both The Exorcist and Legion, he has this whole riff on his mother-in-law having to put a live carp in their bathtub to use for gefilte fish. And so he hasn't been able to take a bath in a week because this live carp lives in their bathtub. And it's hilarious. But it's not necessarily like a punchline joke.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this funny thing that's happening in this cop's house. And yeah, I laugh every time.
That's fascinating. Yeah. You had me at Pink Panther.
I'm like,
And I started like thinking about like different movies and the ways that comedy actually like makes things scarier. And like my congregation, a congregation that I used to serve, like hosted lunch. Well, we provided our space for lunch for folks who were like recording a commercial or something, and we got $500 for that, so it's pretty nice. But yeah, that the like behind the scenes of different scenes and movies and filming, and I went off into this like little world in my imagination.
love it.
yeah. Well, and I think, Pace, one of the interesting things you talked about this real story, right? The inspiration. And it's fascinating to me because this book and film are probably the ones that have the most investment in this need for it to be real.
Mm. Hmm.
I think that is really amazing. And it's also created this sort of follow up through line in which a lot of the other possession and exorcism films that we have to have that tag too,
Yeah,
right? We talked a little bit about the exorcism of Emily Rose. Like there has to
Good
be
names.
this sort of nugget of truth that's inspired by a true story that hangs on these films that other movies don't necessarily require. Um, it's and just like, even though it doesn't do this, the movie The Last Exorcism is done in a found footage style
yeah.
so that it seems more like the truth. This year we had The Pope's Exorcist, which is also inspired by case files of Father Gabriel Amort, who William Friedkin knew and did a documentary about,
Ooh.
and all that kind of stuff. And like, there's this weird hinge of why is it that this is the thing that needs to
Yeah.
be true? And it's more fascinating to me because my own exorcism novel has that too.
Huh.
It's like I had this true story that I needed to be able to tell and deal with, and this was the way to do it.
Well, and
But it's not just me. It's this whole little subset of this need for this type of story to have some kind of truth in
Yeah.
it that we just don't need from a slasher film or a zombie movie. And I just think that's fascinating.
yeah, I when I was a chaplain at a hospital and I was doing a chaplaincy residency, so like a part learning, part work thing. Um, one of the things we did, because somebody like chaplains who were staff chaplains had experiences of people requesting exorcisms, and not everybody requesting the exorcism actually was Catholic, which is a different kind of thing. But we had one of the Catholic chaplains come in and like specifically describe like not how to do an exorcism or what it is, right? But like to explain this is like in the Catholic Church, there's actually a very like hard to pass process, and they kind of hint at this in the movie, but like it is not easy to get an exorcism. There are people who are specialized in exorcism, and those are the people who are like who are going to show up, like
Yeah.
Father, is it Marin? I
Yeah.
think.
In this,
Yeah,
yeah.
like Father Merritt, who are going to show up and do it, but it's specific people who are trained, and there's just like so much that makes it harder for like your average person to like get an exorcism because somebody's sick or something like that. Like it has to be a lot deeper than that for the Catholic Church
In
to be like,
the
yeah, okay.
Catholic Church, yes, that's the one thing I was going to say.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is, in fact, a strain of evangelical Christianity that very much believes in exorcisms, and there are all sorts of exorcist pastors and stuff in that.
Yeah.
Bob Larson is probably the most famous, and so past guest Ross from Ono Ross and Carrie podcast, they did an entire series of episodes taking Bob Larson's fundamentalist evangelical exorcism class and reporting back on what all it entails. But yeah, this is really weird strain because, and I say weird mostly because one of the characteristics of especially evangelical Christianity is by and large a very kind of prejudicial approach to Catholicism. And so and the thing that I find so fascinating is that the evangelical church and the Roman Catholic Church specifically share so much similarities that I just find it such a funny kind of coincidence that there is that. But yes, exorcism is alive and well in various strains of Christianity still to this day, beyond just Roman Catholicism, even though that's what most people associate, probably because of this movie more than anything
A
else.
lot of it probably is because of the movie, and it's also because a lot of the other denominations don't necessarily have the grand ritual of it. Yes, there's a process, but there's not put on the special purple stole. There's not necessarily the fancy vial of holy water.
Mm-hmm.
There's not necessarily the Latin.
Mm-hmm.
And, Latin is very cinematic when it's spoken,
Yep.
right? So there's a lot of those sort of Catholic trappings that make it more interesting in cinema.
Yeah.
And then because that's what's popular in the film, that's what people expect that they're going to get if they go after this.
Yeah. Well, in the other podcast that I host, Nerds at Church, the end of the episode, every episode we say Pax Vobiscum, which is Latin for peace be with you. Which is Latin for peace be with you, but is a particular like it's a like it sounds like a spell, right? And that's why we chose it, because it sounds like a spell, but it just means peace be with you. That's all. Like, yeah.
And then in my upbringing in the LDS church, they're very, on the surface of the common member, very anti-ritualistic and symbolism and iconography. There's not crosses in the church. You don't see members wearing a crucifix or even just a simple gold cross. There's none of that. There's in the service, there's one ritualized part, and even that's kind of boring because, like, instead of wine and a good cracker, it's water and Wonder Bread. So it's seriously, the LDS Church has like made everything exciting about Christian religion boring, except in the temples. So if you're super special and you're good enough to be allowed into the temple, then it's highly ritualized and super specific and freaky weird. So
I never.
But that's the place. It's like, no, you go here for freaky weird.
Yeah.
Everything else is just bland.
Yeah. In my like year in Utah, I have not ever been to a temple opening, but the place that I was serving was in South Jordan, Utah, which is the only place that has not one but two LDS temples, because mostly actually because the mainline Protestants couldn't get their shit together to like cooperate and like do something with that space, and so they're like,
And
well, if
buy
y'all
land.
don't want it, then we're giving it to the LDS church. And so there
Yeah,
are two temples there.
giving.
But like, yeah, so it's like there's just so much about LDS theology and culture that I'm just like, yeah, like living there is a whole different thing.
It really is. And so, of course, the people there don't necessarily like things like The Exorcist.
Mm-hmm.
We're making inroads
Yeah.
or just being
Yeah.
ignored. Like, I wrote my book and I expected at least somebody to give me some crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
I needed somebody to like knock on my door and be like, what are you doing? You're not supposed to talk about that. And nothing. I got nothing. I'm a little disappointed.
That's what they do, though. They either, and this was my experience at least in Utah politically. Like, there's either like, we're not going to say anything and we're going to try and pretend like we are like a regular mainline Protestant denomination, or
You're not.
we're going to come out about how we are not okay with this, and this thing. And so, like,
Right?
it just depends on like what they did last, right? Like, where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, last time you came out that you aren't going to baptize queer people's kids. Well, the time before that, you said, okay, we're going to give money to Volunteers for America um, and the Pride organization to start this like shelter for queer kids. It's
Yeah.
just like, yeah.
It's indecisive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's also sort of built in that they're allowed to change their minds for good or ill, because sometimes they will make ill decisions, backward decisions. But,
Yeah.
they haven't bothered me for a while, and that doesn't mean I won't bother them a little bit.
Love it.
For sure. For sure.
Well, this truly is going to be I promise you all this was a special length episode today. We are an hour in, and we are just getting to our one sentence summaries of the movie. I'm so excited. So I'm not even going to apologize.
It's because TJ
We
is
love
here,
it.
and TJ is wonderful.
Yes.
I talk to people for a living. I'm a teacher. That's what I do.
So,
Sames.
right?
I mean, not a teacher, but same
I'm
job.
a teacher. Same.
Yep.
But our new tradition, starting kind of with our Nightmare on Elm Street season, but by the end it was definitely solid, was to create a one sentence summary of the film. Do you all have a one sentence summary? I need to figure out mine, so y'all can go first.
I love that this question came up, right? Because it was really fascinating and kind of hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
So mine is: a mother exhausts the available science and medicine of the time, seeking a cure for her preteen daughter's sudden illness. And when none of that works, she turns to the Catholic Church for a remedy.
I would just like to point out to our dear readers, listeners, whatever you are, our dear listeners, that my one sentence summary is not the longest this week. I'm on a streak. Pace usually gives me grief for having a one sentence summary that's about as long as yours. And I'm like working hard at this one.
There's not even a semicolon in there, though. There's only one comma.
Yeah, but it kind of needs another comma in there. Like, it does need some sort of punctuation. I feel like it's missing after sudden illness. Like, just a
Well,
little.
maybe.
That's what I do. But you're the English professor. My one sentence summary. Also, I like to do fairly vague, random, weird one sentence summaries that don't necessarily summarize the whole thing. So mine is: the church tries to exorcise puberty out of a girl.
That's good.
Yeah.
Mine is a gay priest, an old priest, and a psychologist priest walk into a house. One leaves out the front door, one leaves out in a hearse, and the last one leaves out of
Ooh,
Spoiler.
that's really good. Oh, Pace. That might be my favorite Fiercely At.
Oh, thank you. So we'll talk about the movie first, and just kind of popcorn some of our favorite moments of the movie. Uh, I, as I said earlier, that this is such an atmospheric film, and that's one of the things I deeply love about it. There are just so many iconic shots that just kind of live on in kind of pop culture and the pop culture zeitgeist. Especially like the shot of Father Marin under the streetlight, just like such an iconic shot that's even used in most modern posters of the film. We'll use that image. I also love the Tubular Bells theme and how that's become associated with The Exorcist. It's really fun how that keeps coming up. And I also love it being set in DC because I miss living in DC. I really loved my 3 years living there and living just a few metro stops and then a little bit of a walk away from the real life Exorcist.
I am starting to suspect that stairs are a big deal in horror films because there's like the Shining stairs, which I always knew about, even having not seen The Shining until this year. I always knew about the Shining Stairs because I grew up in Colorado and we would go to youth group gatherings in Estes Park, and that's where the Shining Stairs are. But now, not only are there Shining Stairs, there's exorcism stairs. And I asked Pace this, but I'm going to ask you too, TJ. How many iconic stairs are there for horror movies? Like, do all the big franchises have iconic stairs that everybody knows about?
I think it's getting there in a lot of ways, but they're not necessarily specific site stairs. Stairs are traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like when you're a kid learning to go up or downstairs, and there's
That is
a
true.
baby guard, so you can't even do that. So it's a little bit forbidden in your early years.
Okay.
Stairs, for me, stairs are always like um, the newer films, A Quiet Place, where there's the barefoot
Mm.
and the nail through the stairs. But that's also imagery from
Ugh.
non-horror films like Home Alone,
Yeah, that's also
right?
like
Putting your
something that
bare
happened to my
foot.
sibling
Mm,
growing up. So,
yeah. And the thing with stairs, though, always is that this is going to sound like a pun, but it's very literal. Is stairs take things to the next level. Right?
I love it.
So when
I
there's
love it.
stairs, you know that there is either going to be rising action or some sort of descending action. Like maybe we're going to get a calm moment because we're going
Mm.
downstairs. Go downstairs. Go upstairs. Like upstairs is bedroom, punishment, or privacy and secrecy.
Mm.
You're not supposed to go upstairs. You're supposed to stay downstairs. You're supposed to go downstairs and hang out in the basement with your friends while mom and dad are upstairs doing mom and dad stuff, right?
Mm.
And so there's that sort of natural growth phenomenon with stairs. Like, are you allowed to go upstairs? Or are you
Mm.
allowed to go downstairs, depending on how
Right.
your house is set
The
up?
attic is always forbidden.
Attics, cellars, yeah.
Mm.
We like Psycho. You go upstairs where you think Mrs. Bates is, but it's Norman. You go downstairs and it's actually where Mrs. Bates' body is sitting in her rocking chair, right? So there's there's all of that. So yeah, I think stairs are a thing.
And
Interesting.
I all that made me think of my favorite pun title of a movie, which of course is a horror movie, which is The House 2, The Second Story.
Yeah.
Favorite movie title of all time. Nothing beats that.
Wes Craven's The People Under the Stairs.
Oh
So
yeah, we covered that movie. Well, we also covered Psycho and People Under the Stairs in
yeah.
season 1 and 2, respectively.
Mm,
But yeah, stairs are dangerous. You fall down stairs and you're not going to have a good
Yeah.
time.
it's true.
You might
It's
even have your head turned around, possibly. Um,
First, you might have your head turned around first and then tumble down the stairs. You don't
Yeah.
know. It depends.
But then again, you could walk down like a crab just fine.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so this film, this walkthrough, in addition to the stairs, there's a lot of other things that happen. I thought it was,
Right?
yeah. Do you want to go first, TJ and Chair?
Sure. One of the things, like just as like a brief walkthrough thing, is that it's a rarity for a horror film now, but this movie starts in the sunlight, in the brutal, harsh, midday Iraqi desert
Yeah.
sunlight. And even throughout the film, there's still a lot of stuff that happens during the daytime.
Yeah.
And we don't get that in a lot of modern horror films at all. Everything just sort of has to happen at night in so much stuff. But this is like, no, we have light. The first two times we see Marin in the film is when he's in the desert during the day, and then when he gets the message to come perform the exorcism and he's walking in the forest in the little woods during the day.
Huh.
And so we also get sort of this signal that Marin is the character of the light in a lot of ways, because that's a more comfortable space for him to be out in the sunlight.
Which I think that's fascinating also because, like, for me, the first thing that I noticed was the call to prayer that was happening. And I didn't know that we were in Iraq, right? Like, I didn't know where exactly we were, but I was like, we're in the Middle East. I don't know anything about The Exorcist, but I don't want this to be like some sort of Islamophobic. The things of Islam are now like possessing the Christian.
And it wasn't necessarily done like
Yeah,
that either.
but that was like
What's fascinating
my immediate
is
reaction.
in that opening scene, the sort of the castle-y tomb thing that you see in the background of the dig is the tomb of Nebuchadnezzar in Iraq. This is location shooting
Yeah.
out there. They went to Iraq to shoot these scenes, right? They didn't just find some desert in Arizona and do this.
Yeah.
So Friedkin was very much like, no, we're going to Iraq. Like, pony up the money. That's where we're going.
Yeah.
And in fact, more background stuff. Pace, you mentioned Blatty wrote the script. And one thing you said is how faithful the film is to the book. Blatty's original script cut that prologue. He changed a bunch of stuff. And Friedkin said, no, I didn't sign on to film some other bullcrap that you just made up. I signed on to film your book.
Yeah.
And so it's Friedkin who made Blatty put all of the stuff like that back and be more true to the novel. And so that's why we get the awesome Iraq scene, and that most of the people aren't like paid extras. There was a legit archaeological dig going on at the time. All of the market people are just people that were there, and all of that. So
kind of like the hospital scenes when they're filming actual procedures being done by actual nurse and doctor staff. What?
Well, you have to remember, Friedkin was a documentary filmmaker before he got into Hollywood.
Okay, that makes so much more sense because one of my complaints frequently with movies is this is not how it would be in real life. And I didn't do that in this one. Like, there's a little bit with, like, okay, if we're doing a Catholic exorcism, what is the actual process of, like, getting a Catholic to do the exorcism, blah, blah, blah. But, like, for the most part, I didn't have those critiques where I'm like, y'all, really? That's how you're going to pretend to do this medical procedure or whatever? So that's fascinating. I love that. I wish more people did it that way.
Right. Well, and that's actually, if I'm allowed to skip a little, one of the biggest differences between the book and the film is all of those procedures that Reagan gets, like the spinal tap and all that, in the book is done at home in her room. Like they cart in the equipment because she's too sick to move at that point when they're doing it. Um, Chris is definitely afraid of taking her outside and somebody seeing what's going on with her daughter. And so they do all that stuff in the room. Whereas in the film, which is some of the most honestly terrifying stuff in the movie, is all of the tests that are done, at the medical facility, at the hospital, and just the sounds of it. And so in the book, we don't get those sounds, but in the movie, we do. And that's all Friedkin saying, no, we're going to make this look as real as possible. And it's also a difference of a couple years and somebody telling Blatty, like, no, they wouldn't do this at home. You gotta go to a hospital and have this stuff done.
Yeah. Well, and I think like the other piece of that, right, that we, instead of starting in the dark, we start in the light. But there is this like real deep contrast in the movie between noisy and like fairly chaotic, especially at the beginning, and calm silence, like the like almost like complete silence. And you get it a lot in those opening scenes with Marin. But I think that also like puts a different perspective on the film than just like, oh, it's a horror film, so everything takes place at night because dark is bad and scary, which contributes to racism and like a whole bunch of things. But instead, it's the silence that I was like, what is going on? Everything is quiet. I am suspicious.
Well, and the other interesting about that is like the Iraqi market, it's just busy noise. It's authentic busy noise. But the moment later after Karras's mother has died and he has the dream of her rising, again, stairs, rising up from the subway, is done silent. But that's something that should be horribly loud. A New York City street like that with the subway stop should be overwhelmingly loud. And no, it's a dream, so he does it silent. But it should be loud. And so it just adds that unreality. Like, here's what's not real, because it has that ethereal, forced silence instead of just the natural noise of the city. There's just so much.
It's true. It's true. Also, that, like, I don't know, Damien, for me, looks like Rocky in the, like, the fighter, right?
Yeah.
And I was like...
Jason Miller was a boxer.
Well, and
that's one of the things Friedkin said, and that's one of the reasons he got cast, because in the novel, another character, a couple different characters say, Karras, oh yeah, the one that looks like a boxer.
Interesting. I didn't know that. And I was literally like, my notes, not knowing any of that, were the Rocky priest actually providing pastoral care? Because like, I don't experience priests providing pastoral care. There's a whole bunch of like how priests are portrayed. But like, I was like, because I thought he looked like Rocky. So that's hilarious that he's actually supposed to look like a boxer. So I was not totally off, even though I was making it up.
No, he's perfectly cast. That's the thing. But he was an unknown. Like, nobody knew who he was. But he had won, Jason Miller won a Pulitzer that same year for a play that he wrote called That Championship Season, which is how Friedkin first saw him, because he'd gone to see this play that had won a Pulitzer and Miller was in it. And it was like, that's my guy. And then, studios wouldn't let him have him at first, and they cast somebody else. They cast Keach.
Yeah.
And then Miller was like, I thought I was the guy. Let's make this happen. Like, and it worked out.
Yeah.
So, and then he didn't do a lot of other stuff. He's briefly in the Ninth Configuration, which, as Pace mentioned, Blatty also wrote and directed and has a role in, which is hilarious. And then he's also shows up again, sort of maybe as Karras in The Exorcist 3.
Interesting. I feel like there are spoilers in there because I thought he died. So.
Yeah, so did everybody else. So did Kinderman, who's the main character of The Exorcist 3.
Dun dun dun. Yep.
Yep. But of course, the fun part is for maybe those who don't know, Jason Miller's son is Jason Patrick, who is in The Lost Boys.
I did not know
Michael.
that. Oh
Huh.
my goodness. I love it.
Okay.
Yep.
I love it. That's a cool connection.
That's me dropping nuggets for
Yeah,
y'all.
yeah.
I love it. I love it.
I think back to your point, Emily, about the quiet. One of the things that makes the movie work so well is that when something loud does happen, it is sort of unexpected. Um, Early on, when Chris is exploring the attic, again, stairs, and the candle flame,
Mm-hmm.
we don't expect that because it's so quiet.
Yeah.
Right? What we're expecting is the noises of rats and rat traps to go off because that's what she's looking for, and that's not what we get.
Mhm.
Instead, we get this candle that, and then eventually all the thumping, like the house is quiet and it's an orderly house. It's taken care of. There are
Mm-hmm.
servants who take care of this house and a secretary and
Yeah.
all that, and then there's no legitimate reason for all of this stuff to happen to Reagan,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all essentially it's proximity.
Yeah.
They just happened to live across the street from where Karras was serving.
Mhm.
Karras is the target.
Mm.
So yeah, it's purely
Why
Purely-
is he the target though?
We'll talk about that.
because he's the priest who's losing
Yeah.
faith.
That's
Do they
that
think
is
they
something
can
that
get
is
him?
no.
Huh.
We'll get into this part more in the book club because there's so much more
Okay.
of Karras's
There really
interior life that happens in the book that we don't get in the
Yeah.
film.
There's interior life for everybody
Yeah,
in the book, except, well, no, I'll
Yeah.
save that. Save that.
Yeah.
Oh.
I did think it was interesting. I did not understand the one at the party who was like, "You're a Nazi," and I was like, ah.
So again, that's something else that gets more in depth in the book.
Okay.
But Carl, he's Austrian. He and his wife are from Austria, and they've been house servants with Chris McNeil for a while. But Burke Dennings, who characteristically he's British, and the time of it, he served in World War II with the British Army, and so hates Nazis.
Yeah.
And anybody who sounds German, it's early
for him.
1970s. That's not that far removed from World War II. He's still on. Anybody who he thinks might be German is a Nazi.
Which is so problematic on so many levels. Like
Yeah.
the number of German Lutherans, because there's lots of Lutherans in Germany. What a surprise. But the number of German Lutheran congregations in that time period that stopped having worship services in German because they didn't want to be accused of being Nazis. Or that was when the push, especially in the 50s, but that was when the push to put US flags in sanctuaries, which is horrible and idolatrous and against our actual religion, but happens everywhere, right? That push was to prove that you weren't communist, to prove that you weren't Nazis, to prove that you were USians. And so that is fascinating. Yeah.
And then Dennings is that part of his character is just this explosive. I think the movie does a really good job of showing this too. He has this very explosive personality where he especially when he's drinking, gets angry really fast. But then immediately the next scene after he's yelling about the Nazi and stuff, he immediately turns to Chris and is like, "Do you have more to eat?" Or I can't remember exact line, but just in this completely calm manner, as if nothing happened. And it's just a very interesting thing that, again, I think goes to Blatty's film experience of so many notorious directors who have these out of control rages and tempers, and then just are able to pick up
because of drinking, especially because of the alcoholism. You're this artist who's under a lot of pressure. Of course, you're going to drink.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. and that McGowan was such a small person
Mm,
comparatively to everyone
yeah.
else in the film. He's petite, he's tiny, he comes off as like this raging elf guy, and so the only things we see though is that sort of drunk anger and buffoonery from him. But what we don't see in the movie is what actually happened when he was in Reagan's room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't know. There's really good filmic and novel development reasons for that. And it's a matter of
Hmm.
perspective. Um, we only see things from Marin, Chris, Karras, and Kinderman in the film. We're with one of those four characters for the film, duration of the film. The person we're never with, in the book, there's a couple scenes where we follow Carl
Yeah.
that are actually cut out of the film. The person we are never, ever in the perspective of in the film or the novel is Reagan.
For
Never.
Yep.
real.
And
For
so
real.
anything that no one can speak to having witnessed involving Reagan, we don't
Yep.
know what happened.
Hmm.
Dennings is dead. He's not around to actually tell us really what
Yeah.
happened.
And
All we get is the sort of demonic voice accusation that she killed
mm,
him. And even then, that's not necessarily 100% sure, even at that moment.
yep.
Like, there's no possible instigation. Like, I've read papers that claim he abused Reagan, and that's why he got killed.
Hmm.
And,
I think I
there's
had
maybe some truth to
a
that.
question about that.
But yeah, he's drunk and alone with a 12-year-old girl, and he dies. That's all we know because we don't see Reagan's perspective ever.
And that's such a great entry point into the book. But before we do that, just checking anything else about the film specifically we want to talk about before we get into some of the book stuff.
It takes place on Halloween.
Okay.
Well, it starts on Halloween ish.
And ends around Easter-ish.
Yeah, the movie does. Yeah, because you see, and it's only brief because you see McNeil walk by the kids in their
Mm-hmm.
Halloween costumes.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, I didn't know it ended around Easter. Well, that feels very apropos.
Mm-hmm.
New
It's
life
seasonal.
and whatnot.
Yep. Yep. So the book oof, is still like a very compelling read. I think this was my second time reading it. Um, First time ages ago, so I didn't really remember much. But like, oh my gosh. So some of the things that you, if you go out and read this book, or if you have read this book,
Which you
yeah,
should do.
definitely. To just point out right off the bat is
No
that
promises. This was a very scary movie.
it's okay. It's okay.
And so the movie follows the book pretty well,
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
faithfully.
Yeah. So that'd be a scary book.
It
I'm
is.
just saying.
So
Only a Padawan.
it is a very scary book, and I think it. But one of the things that's just so interesting is the difference because of just the two different mediums. There are going to have to be differences.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that the book really does well is keeping the mystery alive of what is actually happening with Reagan. And this is one of the reasons narratively why you're not going to have any interior life for Reagan, because we're all witnesses to what's happening. We're not supposed to know if she is actually possessed or
Mm-hmm.
not until the very end. And then even then it's still kind of left a little bit in the air. But the scenes, especially in the book that follow Father Karras in the third and fourth parts of the book, were really kind of Father Karras's interior life is just full of these doubts of faith. And so he's approaching this of doubting his own faith, doubting that God could be real. So clearly, exorcism and demon possession cannot be real. So clearly, this girl is not being afflicted by um, demons or something. It has to be a psychological problem. And so, just the lengths that he goes to and the mental gymnastics that become more and more apparent as we get closer and closer to the final part of the book, of just like how kind of how silly some of the stuff that he is trying to rationalize what's happening. That clearly Reagan has ESP because she can read my mind. It's not a demon possession, but she can read people's minds, because that's apparently more plausible than being possessed by a demon. So it's like these kind of just really interesting perspectives that I just love. And so so basically the book, it Karis doesn't appear much in the first half, but the second half of the book is basically following Karis's journey from doubt into belief, and it's just something that the movie touches on and has like moments where it tries to convey that visually, but because it's not like stated explicitly, or we don't get access to his interior life, it's something to easily miss. And I think this is testament to his acting and also the direction of Friedkin. There's that one scene where during the exorcism itself, and the bed starts to lift up, and both in the book and the movie, this is kind of one of the moments where he Karis finally like flips and starts to accept, oh no, this is actually happening, because there's no way that this bed can just rise up off the ground. But to see that look of realization on his face in the film was just like such a fantastic moment of like, you just see it in his eyes, like, oh my god, this is real.
Which, okay, hear me out. Having not read the book, but having watched the movie, I thought it was fascinating because Karis definitely, like, I remember the moment when he switched in the movie between, really, this is like a psychological thing. We need to make sure she has a psychiatrist and therapy and like all of those things. And then there's like a little bit of indecision where he's like, well, maybe let's pursue both. And then he's like, okay, this is an exorcism. This is a case in need of exorcism. Um, but something you said, TJ, earlier was particularly like that he was the target of this because his faith was wavering, because he was not as sure of his faith. And I think it's fascinating because ultimately what this does is solidify his faith.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right? And so like there's this sense, and I think about like the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, which I read like ages ago, but like this sense that like we think that like the demons, the devil's evil is going to come for us most strongly when we are like vulnerable to losing our faith, which is the situation Karis was in, and which is what happens in this movie. But that's not effective, right? Like if their
No.
purpose is to like really get him to totally lose his faith, then not engaging is actually what is most likely to do it, or to engage other people, right? Like if that was when one of the stories about priests abusing parishioners and kids broke, that would be the thing for him, right? But
Yeah.
instead they like directly attack, and then he's like, oh, I'm gonna defend from this,
But
and actually strengthens his face. And I think that that's fascinating, like, oh, you're the target for this, and this whole thing, like they think that they're going to like, I don't know what they think they're gonna do, but like obviously if you show your cards,
well,
you're confirming the
there are
reality
two
of
This
supernatural
is
things.
one of the biggest differences again between the book and the film. First of all, because of that poster image of Marin under the streetlight, people assume that the title character is Marin. It's not. It's Karis. The book's about Karis. In the film, Karis's crisis of faith is centered around grief for his mother. And that's like the only real thing that we get,
Yeah.
that he took this job in DC, this position in DC, instead of staying with his mom in New York. And that's why she became destitute and
Mhm.
died, because he wasn't there. In the film, that's his crisis of faith. In the book, as Pace was mentioning, it's much more internal, and it's more centered on Karras's job as the psychiatrist, which the Jesuits paid for him to do. He was a priest first and then a psychiatrist. And his job is to console priests in their with their mental health issues and their own crisis of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we get from the book is Karras's inability to do any kind of self-care. He is so busy and
Mm-hmm.
consumed with caring for other people that he doesn't necessarily care
Yeah.
about. It's his job,
Mm-hmm.
that he starts to lose faith because of that. How can I care? How can I be the person people trust to tell all their problems to when I can't deal with my
Yeah.
own?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know how, which is ironic. He doesn't know how to deal with his own
Mm-hmm.
problems, and because he doesn't have
Yeah.
time.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the job is so stressful and so consuming, he's constantly worried about the next person that's going to knock on his door and need his help.
Mm-hmm.
And so he can't help himself. And so the crisis of faith is, in fact,
Burnout.
very
Yeah.
theological, in that he can't rely on the higher power that he's supposed to know has his
Yeah.
back. He can't do it.
Which,
And so
And
that's the
yeah,
crisis of
which
faith.
like now I'm like every pastor everywhere and every clergy person, every church worker
Oh,
everywhere
yeah.
should be watching this, because that is
Right.
exactly like what we are all living through is in this, late stage capitalist hellscape. Everybody is burnt out. Everybody is working beyond their capacity. Nobody has enough money because it's all hoarded by like a couple
Mhm.
people. And like we are in that position where it is like charged to clergy in particular, at least in an explicit sense, to care for
Yeah.
the spiritual needs of these entire communities. And right now the assumption is that it will automatically be at the expense of their own self-care, because you don't need that, because your gift and your self-care and your spiritual care comes from leading worship, which is not the same thing as renewing your spirit. And yeah, who
Also,
It's hard to be comforted or even ask for comfort when you're the person who's supposed to be the comforter.
mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also wanted to quick have 2 points of clarification for um, you, Emily, about the doubt piece and the demon direct attacking. The book makes it clear, but I still think the movie does as good a job it can visually to show this progression. But the book, it's explicitly clear that the demon is playing with Karras and purposefully reacting to things like fake holy water to try to convince him it's not real, because the demon is trying to get him to doubt himself and doubt what's going on around him. And the
I
demon
was wondering about the fake
only
holy water.
yeah the
Okay.
demon only shows its true self and leaves no room for doubt when Marin comes in. And we'll talk about the character of Marin in a moment, because the movie versus the book, I think Marin is what the movie leaves out about Marin makes his character just seem so bizarre in the movie. But we'll get to that in a
Mm-hmm.
moment. But the other thing, the other aspect of it is that Marin and Karras have this beautiful conversation right in the beginning of part 4 of the book, where Karras finally starting to recognize that the demon possession is real. And so he asks Marin, who has experience with possession, who's described as a person with like this unwavering faith, why do possessions happen? especially because in the doctrine of the Catholic Church, a person who is possessed is not responsible for their actions, so it doesn't actually affect their ability to reach salvation if they're possessed, or if they do harm to others while they're possessed. Um, so it's like, so then what's the point of possession? And Marin responds that possession is meant for those around the possessed person, to make them doubt, to destroy their faith, to make them fear, to make them despair.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation, and we don't get anywhere near as much of that in the film. There's a little bit more in the director's cut, of the two of them sitting in the hall in a brief break.
Yeah.
But in the book, it's really, it's, it can be said that it's Blatty trying to explain the unexplainable, right? Because there's so much that's not explained in the film or even the book. Like, the book has more sort of wild connections. So in the movie, you see the weird little ugly bird that Regan paints. In the book, it's made explicitly clear through Kinderman's investigation that the paint that Regan used on the ugly bird is the same paint that was used in the Statue of Mary desecration. That's not in the movie. Like, the bird and even the Ouija board that sort of starts the Captain Howdy thing, gone. Like, they're like plot threads that have just like, yeah, we don't need that anymore.
It was there and then it was gone, and I was like, is that how she got possessed? Yep. Who's connecting to the desecration of the Virgin?
Actually.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, because novels are more about this. There's subtext that is gone from the film. Chris herself, like, we know that she's divorced and her husband's a dick that won't call his own daughter on her birthday. Like, that's the big thing.
I thought he was maybe a priest because she was calling Rome, and then a priest showed up, and Pace was like, no. And I was like, oh, no. Okay.
But one of the things lost in the film that's in the novel is that Regan had an older brother who died in a boating accident. And so that's gone.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of the character of Chris and Regan's connection, is that they've lost two people. They lost this son and brother. They lost her father and husband. They lost father and a husband, even though, like, he's still alive. He's just not there. Like, he's taken his trauma experience and bailed. And so the two of them, like, have to, it's, the classic us against the world kind of thing. The book gets more into how there's, because Chris is famous. Like, she's not just some schlub doing a couple movies. Like, she's, worldwide. The claims are that Chris McNill is based on Shirley MacLaine. And so she's pretty famous in the early 70s. And so there's, all of the Time magazine spread of the two of them on the cover and things like that. Like, they're famous in the book. And so that's why there's so much more fear from Chris of having this thing exposed, this thing that's suddenly wrong with her daughter. And, there are moments where they play it off a little bit, like, oh, she's just sick. But as it gets worse and worse, the two of them become more and more isolated from everybody. Right. And that's why it's so important in the film and the book that there's this big party at the beginning of Regan's possession, where, it's a fancy town party. In the book, Chris actually invites the president, like, and she has an invitation of her own to go to a dinner at the White House. That's how famous she is. Right. And so she gets a senator instead, and the astronaut, who's one of my favorite characters, like, has one thing in this book and movie, that Regan comes down, she urinates on the floor and looks at the astronaut and says, "You're going to die up there." In the movie, that's all we get. We don't even get his name. In the book, we get a name, and it's Cutshaw. Cutshaw is one of the main characters in the Ninth Configuration. And his fear he's in an asylum at this point, a military asylum actually,
Oof.
and his fear is that he was going to die in space. Nothing from The Exorcist is ever mentioned.
Hmm.
We just have that same character.
Yeah.
And I
Interesting.
think that's just really fascinating to me. Some of the other good stuff from the book that's not in there is we get Kinderman's suspicion of Carl that maybe he killed Dennings. And so in the book, Kinderman follows him around when he says he's going to go to a movie. But what Carl actually does is goes and visits his junkie daughter that his wife thinks is dead to give her money.
Knowing that she's going to use the money for drugs, even, which is another part of the shame
Yeah.
in that.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so, like, it's the only, because in the book, it's made clear that he lost his last job as a house servant for a doctor because he was stealing drugs.
Oh.
He wasn't stealing them for himself, he was stealing them for his daughter,
Yeah.
who was an addict. And so that's a whole
Hmm.
other similar subplot of how do parents take care of their children in the worst situations possible.
Mm.
And so Karis is the flip side of that. How does a child
Take care of the parent.
take care of their parent? And he fails.
Mm-hmm.
She dies.
Yeah.
Like, but she's old, it's going to happen. But the way she dies in the book, it's stated that her radio was on, which is another thing that happens in The Exorcist 3 and Legion. Old people leaving their radios on. And so the only reason she was found is because one of the neighbors complained that she wouldn't turn her radio off all night long and eventually had the cops come, and she'd been dead for like 3 days. So,
Wow.
yeah. So there's a lot of little things like that that, just add to the depth of the novel that don't translate well. Like if we had got those scenes of Carl visiting his daughter, the pacing would be off.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you put that in the film? Like, well, for film, you don't need it. I think if they were going to legitimately remake The Exorcist, more of the Chris and the dead son would be in there because modern remakes like to explain stuff more than just letting things be. And that's one of the hallmarks of 70s cinema, late 60s and 70s cinema is we didn't want things explained. It just was because we knew bad shit in the world wasn't explainable.
Mm-hmm.
It just was.
Yeah. Another piece that I really love about the book, well, there's a Marin thing which I want to talk about in just a moment, but before we get into that is I love that it is clear when Damien Karras finally reaches out to the church to investigate whether or not this is a legitimate exorcism. He still does not think it's a legitimate demon possession at that moment. He sees the help me and realizes that whatever is going on, he thinks that exorcism will be to quote even in the movie, this line is about like exorcism can be a shock treatment to like convince by through the power of suggestion convince a mentally ill person that their problems are being solved. And so that is why he's going into this as the church. And he still is doubting that
he's still in psychologist mode.
Yeah, he doesn't think it's
well in the film and the book. The first person who suggests exorcism is one of the doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he straight up says to Chris, have you ever heard of exorcism? And she's like what, a voodoo doctor? You're going to bring in some witch doctor in here? Like, she wasn't even necessarily thinking Catholics, like, even though they all live right across the street from her and she sees them every day. She wasn't even thinking of that. She was thinking of some much more wild, exotic
and
thing.
The church, but like when Karras goes to the church, what's interesting is he thinks that the church probably still won't accept it. He doesn't think that there's enough evidence, so it's kind of a shock to us, the reader, and in the movie, the viewer, when the church is just like, yeah, let's do it, and calls him Marin.
There are steps in there.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, again, the film makes things look like they happen faster.
And
in the book, there's this whole thing where Chris actually takes Reagan to another facility for treatment in Colorado.
Colorado. Have to.
And they're there for, at the very least, they're there for like 2 months.
And the decision making, the weird thing about the film is it shows the decision making of the priests happening in this room, but in the book that's not there. We find out through Karis that they have assigned, like, he gets a call and saying, yes, the exorcism is being approved and Marin is going to do it. You can be the person. That leads to further doubt of him, like, oh, they don't trust me.
Right.
They don't think I'm going to be good enough, that kind of thing.
They say just like that. It's like, well, we would benefit from having a psychiatrist in
Yeah.
the room.
So
they're not even the church at that point's not necessarily relying on him in a clerical manner.
Which, like, to be fair, there are specific people, probably like one per diocese, who are actually trained for exorcism. So it's not actually surprising in the like real Catholic world that this random priest who's a psychiatrist is not going to be the one leading the exorcism. And turns out to be pretty accurate because he's like, I'm stuck and I can't finish the words.
Like, the deal with Marin wasn't that he had done this a lot.
He had done it
It's that he had done it once. One. He did
which we
one.
see in film the exact same exorcism done twice in 2 different movies with the same cast. That's a story for another day.
Some of the same cast.
Yeah.
Some of the same
I don't know what we're talking about anymore.
It's okay. We'll get there.
I'm visited several seasons down the road.
Yeah, but yeah, so like Blatty really is a Roman Catholic. He went to Georgetown University. Like, he knew a lot. He did a lot of research, and B, he knew a lot of the Catholic doctrine inside and out, and so that really shows up in the book, and we see pieces of it in the film, just not the same level of detail and stuff. And that's part of the pace in the film, is it needs to keep the action flowing. So it seems like the exorcism happened, the approval for the exorcism is like right away, stamp of approval, but it goes through.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy is it feels like the exorcism itself starts sooner in the film, and in the book it's like the last like 40 pages before Marin's back in the room and the actual exorcism happens. Everything else is appropriately build up to it.
And then I think
also
go ahead.
Okay, I don't know if this happened in the book, but Pace and I multiple times now have talked about the trope of like the person with the heart pills, and if they don't take one, they die.
Yes.
And clearly we have this trope. Marin has some sort of pills that he has to take, or he dies.
Yep.
Presumably. But he takes the pills. That's the thing that I can't get around, is we see him take the pills once, I think, when he's still in Iraq. But he takes them once in like their little break thing during the exorcism. He takes the pill, so presumably he's not going to magically die of not having his heart pill.
That goes back.
It's an easy out. It allows the non-believer to say that's why he died. But again, it's also a moment when no one else is in the room. Marin and Reagan.
I thought that was really
Harris
weird.
has stepped out, so we don't know. And even the novel does this too. Is no one else is in the room.
Harris comes in and
we come back. Marin's on the floor and he's dead. We don't know what actually happened in those moments. She's also loose.
Yeah.
From the straps.
Right.
In the film and the book. And sitting in the corner with that little giggle. Something happened. It wasn't just his heart that gave out on its own. Something else happened. Then we don't know.
And,
and I love that. I love not knowing in a lot of ways. Like, I want to know answers to things, but also I don't.
So much of,
because the explanation is probably stupid.
So much of the action in the book and film takes place off screen, and we find out about it secondhand, and that just adds to the suspense and the atmosphere. but
Oh
also
yeah.
to that central question of like what is actually happening, and kind of leaving space for that mystery to unfold. I think the movie makes it a little bit clearer that it truly was a, well, not a little bit. The movie like actually textually like shows the demon, clips of the demon and stuff appearing. So in the movie, it's very clear she was possessed by the end of the film. But in the book, there's still that little bit room for doubt. Because even like something that I did not remember, like I guess I had a false memory about, is from reading the book the first time, is I thought that when Karis at the end sacrifices himself, I thought that we got more of his interior thoughts of what happening there, but we don't. We just like as
Nope.
soon as he asks the demon to come into himself, it switches from like interior Karis to exterior. It describes what's happening to him physiologically, and then he jumps out the window, and then he's discovered by his priest friend, yeah,
Dyer.
Dyer, uh, and who does last rites and stuff. But like we don't actually know like what happened inside of him at that point. So it's whenever the demons evolve, like we just lose all um what's the word I'm looking for? First hand source of what's happening. Everything becomes
Yeah,
secondhand.
we don't get that
Yeah.
point of view. And I think it's really a smart
Mm-hmm.
move on both Blatty and Friedkin to do that, because trying to speak from the demonic perspective, like that's somebody else's
Yeah.
movie. That's a movie that's not necessarily about the human characters anymore. Right? That's a different movie.
Mm.
And so, and also, like you said, it maintains the mystery and the doubt, right? If we get the point of view of the demonic entity, um, there's no mystery anymore. Like that's one of the strengths of some films, like Halloween, where we start off in the POV of 6-year-old Michael Myers about to kill his
Yep.
sister, right? Then we're complicit in that act. And here, the creators of this film and novel have specifically said, no, as a human being with whatever kind of soul that we have, we are not going to be complicit in the demonic
Yep.
acts. It's very fascinating.
And then I have one last thing I want to touch on from the book, which is about Marin, the character Marin in the book. He doesn't, kind of similar to the movie, like he really only shows up in the last act, and we don't really get much from his perspective at this point. We're like basically following Karis along as in his encounter with Marin. And the weird thing to me in the movie that never made sense, except I thought the movie was trying to make a different point about Marin, and then reading the book, I realized what the point actually I think is supposed to be, which is when Marin comes in and Karis is like, "So let me explain the backstory. Let me explain what's going on." And Marin's like, "No, let me just go right to her room, confront this." And that just seems like so gross and toxic. And like, what is he thinking? Like, why would he not want the background and stuff like that? The book plays it out a little bit different. Like, it's still kind of the same sequence of events, but like the reasoning for it becomes so much clearer, which is that Karis has spent the last 150 pages of this book riddled in indecision and doubt. And then he's confronted
Mm.
with this person who has such a clear understanding of faith and the reality that this person is possessed. This person is possessed, not even just possessed, but possessed with the same demon he already encountered. And when he goes up to Reagan's room, he and Reagan have this staring match in the book, where they don't even say anything, and then he just turns around and leaves, because he is basically, they game recognize in game, they recognize each other and are ready for this epic face off. And that's part of why the demon was calling for Marin earlier in the book and the movie, when the demon's saying Marin, 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 and stuff like that, is
Yep.
kind of preparing for this epic battle. And so we get Karis, who now suddenly is like just being confronted with like, oh my gosh, here is this person that is so like Marin's just played off in the book as this like deeply spiritual person who's written hundreds of books and stuff about like theology and stuff, and he comes in and he just has this clear understanding of this is how we help Reagan. This is the battle of good versus evil
Yep.
playing out. And so that I don't need to hear about her story because that's irrelevant. What's relevant is getting this demon out of her. There's not multiple personalities. There's one. It's this demon. He's trying to trick us using all these tricks and stuff like that. And it so it kind of becomes that confrontation between science and faith, or this notion of like the scientific method is a methodology in doubt of we learn about things by doubting and trying to disprove our hypotheses, and if it holds up then we know it's true. And then we have Marin coming in, and he's just this complete opposite figure of like this very clear, this is what is actually happening in this situation, and this sense of this like deep calm presence, which we don't get in the movie well either. But like there's this lovely conversation between Chris and Marin over a cup of coffee with alcohol in it in the book and stuff like that, but just Chris is just like inspired just being in Marin's presence of this really deep calm kind of emanating from him, even in with the demon shouting and all the stuff around, that you can find this sense of calm. And so that makes so much more sense in the book than in the movie, when Marin just comes in and is like, I don't need to hear any of this stuff, let's just dive right in.
Well, there's a practicality to it that is not made clear. The church would have given him all the documentation already. Whether he read it or not,
is a whole nother story.
We don't know. But they would have given him that information. Yeah. They would have had to have given him everything that Karras gave them, given the diocese. I like the decisive reading of it. Like the just, nope, I know what's going on. Let's get this done. We've wasted enough time already. Yeah. But that also would come from having read the background beforehand.
Also an aspect that the book makes more clear than the movie. The movie does a decent job of this too, but Reagan is like a day or two from death by the time Marin shows up. Like she has not been eating. Her heart is about to give out from all the especially because she's not been eating. They keep giving her sedatives to keep her from like harming herself and harming others, and like she is on the brink of death. So like time is ticking. We need to get this demon out of her, or she's going to literally die in a day or two.
I not knowing the background from the book for Marin just like coming in and like down to business, I assumed it was connected to how much Damien had gotten just like caught up in like a way that makes sense for a human being who is seeing this human being possessed by a demon, and this mother who cannot do anything, and his own like, you know, projection of his own like inability to care for his mother and all of that stuff. Like Karras is enmeshed in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Marin comes in, I like assumed that it was no, if I get enmeshed, this demon knows more about me. Like the more time it takes to get enmeshed, the more the demon figures out about me, the more I'm caught up in it, the harder it is to push this. Because ultimately, like the idea, right, is to push the demon out of her. Ultimately, it like goes out of her and into and like Damien's way of doing it is like actually to draw the demon out of her and into himself. But that dynamic, I think, was just how I
love your reading. I think that's definitely a valid interpretation too. And
film wise, it makes a lot of sense to get that kind of character from Max von Sydow 8 years before he was Jesus. He was Jesus in The Greatest Story Ever Told. Right? Yep. So a film audience at the time would have known that. And been like, oh yeah, of course, this guy was Jesus. He's going to come in and save the day. He doesn't. And that, again, plants those seeds of doubt just a little bit more. But yeah, we're like, oh yeah, He looks a lot older. He wasn't that old. But yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that dude's Jesus.
Yeah.
That's, other than like, as we said in here, Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar and, those sort of non-traditional Jesuses. Jesus I? Jesus I?
Yeah.
I don't know. What's the plural for that?
Yes.
Jesus side, Jesus.
But the audience would have been like, oh yeah, yep, that's Jesus. Bring it on.
I love
Right?
it. And that like adds to that like rug being pulled out under you, and your point that the Exorcist is not actually Marin, it's Karis, because like we're expecting this epic battle, and even Marin is prepared for this. The demon is prepared for this epic show off, and then Marin dies off screen, off book, and in this very anticlimactic way, and was not, and his deep faith was not enough to like counter the evil in this, and then it is the doubter who is able in a moment of faith to pull the demon into himself and save
Yep.
the day.
That's the theological part,
Yep.
isn't it? The faith of the faithful is not always as strong as the faith of the doubtful.
It's almost like doubt is a necessary component to faith. What? Thanks, Paul Tillich.
Thank you. And thank you, Emily, for helping us transition to our deep dive. Finally, 2 hours
Ta-da.
in. Let's do this.
I mean, we've been diving deep
Yes.
already. Just not the same kind.
No, it's 12:30 my time and 1:30 your time, Emily. This is so fun.
No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
12:30 my time and 11:30 your time.
Yes,
Case.
thank you. I'm glad.
I was like, it's not that late for you.
Thank you.
1:30 would be a whole different cover.
Oh, so this movie and book, so deeply theological, both the film and the book, I think. And we've been talking about this a lot already. But one thing I want to get into, and I think you also have this in your notes, Emily, is what this movie and the book, I think in the book's case, it is less intentional. But in the film, there are definitely aspects of this that I think are intentional. But that still doesn't excuse it either way, of being a very interesting take. This is coming out in 1973 during the height of the second wave feminist movement. In a very kind of anti-feminist film where you have this single mother and her daughter. All the men in their lives are not there anymore. And you need the patriarchal institution of the church to come in, rein these women in, and bring them back to the faith, or get them under control, especially this out of control daughter that is just like doing all sorts of stuff, not understanding why. There's no man.
Puberty.
Yeah, there's no man to come in and teach her right from wrong. So of course she's going to be out of control and stuff like that. And so the puberty thing is definitely a piece of this, with the masturbation with the crucifix stuff. In the book, correct me if I'm wrong, TJ, but I don't remember her age in the book, but I have a feeling it was a little bit younger than the movie.
No, in the book, it starts out she's 11. She's about to have her 12th birthday. So for the bulk of the book, she's 12.
It's right on puberty. Yeah. So
yeah, you know how people sometimes say, "Oh, you never could make this movie now." This is one of them.
Yeah.
You would never be able to film that scene now.
Right?
They just wouldn't let you.
That scene would not pass muster.
Yeah. Which like has a lot of different components to it. Right? Like they wouldn't let you have masturbation with a crucifix. Absolutely not. They would not let you. But not for like the same reasons as like also we would be very concerned if you were making a movie that is saying that puberty for this girl is horrible and scary and uncontrollable, and so we must exorcise it is demonic, right? Like we have theoretically developed enough in our understanding to say no, actually menstruation is not demonic. It is a part of life for around half of the population once they reach a certain age. And so like it was really interesting to watch this with Susanna, who was a guest on Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1 and on Nightmare on Elm Street 5, 3, 5. I thought it was 5. 5, The Dream Child. And she is a former president of Now New Jersey. And so, like, when it comes to anti choice propaganda, she can pick it out like nobody's business. And so to be watching it with her and hear her comments of like, well, this is a super anti-feminist movie, and like to think about it through that lens of like, this is all happening right when Reagan is reaching the age of puberty. And that's when the demon possession starts, and that's when she becomes uncontrollable, and an uncontrollable girl is in fact terrifying, especially to the Catholic Church. If you look at what the Catholic Church has done to so many different nuns in its last 50 years, right? Like since the exorcism. In that time span, like the silencing of nuns and the ways that nuns have pushed back, all of that stuff. And then you add in there masturbation with a cross, which is the actual thing that people are going to be pissed about. Which is like,
yeah.
okay, be pissed about it. Like, please don't use this as the audiogram paste, but like, who the fuck cares? Be pissed. It's a cross. Like, give her something better, and she probably would use something better if it weren't because she was demon possessed. But then, like, it goes all the way to the point, and Susanna looked this up because I was not in that space to look it up. But like the amulet that Marin finds at the beginning and that comes back at the end, right? Like it's the movie is bookended by Marin, but it's also bookended by this amulet. And the amulet is Pazuzu, and I might not be pronouncing it right, but Pazuzu, which has like protective magic for pregnant people and is apotropaic. So it's like specifically like connected to fertility, to what is traditionally attributed to particularly cisgender women, and like all of that. And it's just like, yeah, the Catholic Church has been like anti-choice, anti-bodily autonomy, all of that stuff for so long.
Yeah.
And it's
well, Pazuzu's described as a fertility god.
Yeah. And another
and the thing that there's the head that Marin finds, and then the little medallion is a St. Joseph's medal. And it's like the implication that Friedkin tries to make is that because this is a supernatural film, it's the same medal. So, but you know, the interesting thing to see is that there's only 5 women in this movie. There's Reagan, who's a preteen. There's Sharon, the secretary / tutor, who's in her early 20s. There's Chris, who's not yet midlife, but as you said, a single mother, professional single mother. There's the servant Willie, who's in her 60s. And there's Karis's mom. There's some nurses, right? But
they're like in and out, yeah.
But there's Karis's mom, who's old and for most of the movie dead.
Yeah.
Right. So getting those 5 stages of womanhood to me is also fascinating.
Yeah.
And what happens, I'm going to take a wild guess. Pace, maybe you went to see The Exorcist Believer?
I have not yet, but it's on my list.
Okay.
But
I did, because so many people hated it. And like, I don't care. I'm going anyway. It's an Exorcist movie. I'm going. Ellen Burstyn's in it. She's Chris McNill. And the Leslie Odom Jr. character asks her why she wasn't a witness in the room of her own daughter's exorcism. And she says, her line is, because of that pesky patriarchy. So in 2023, she's given the space to say, those fucking men kept me out of the room at my own daughter's worst moments. And maybe they thought it was the right thing to do, but she didn't.
Yeah.
She would have rather been in the room.
It's so fascinating to me too that like we're giving a lot of slack to not slack, the opposite, a lot of flack, that's what I was looking for, to the Catholic Church, and kind of like the patriarchy coming in and correcting these women's behavior. But there's kind of this science versus religion aspect of the movie that I talked about, this tension there. And when the movie does a really good job saying this, is that Chris is this woman trying to navigate these two realms that are fully dominated by men. When she's at that table and they're telling, with the doctors all around her, there's only one other woman at the table. The rest are all men, and they're telling her what she needs to do for her daughter. So she's this woman being told by the male-dominated medical establishment what to do, by the male-dominated church what to do, and just is kind of trapped in there with no agency. And we also get that with Reagan, and that's one of the side effects of never giving any interior life to Reagan, is that she is completely robbed of agency throughout the entire book and film. And in the book especially, I feel like that's intentional by talking about like the possession robbing you of agency. But even so, like there's just no agency for Reagan ever, and we don't get that until Exorcist 2, the heretic, but we don't need to talk about that.
And I think it is much more intentional in the book, whereas in the film, it's more for cinematic purposes. So it's easier to have to follow fewer characters. But in a book, like, follow as many characters as you want, as long as you're consistent and it makes sense. So it is, I think it is a lot more intentional.
Okay. So I just had to look this up because I was like, this is about the right time. Roe v. Wade became the law of the land in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
So this movie came out at the end of the year in which abortion rights actually became legal and abortion finally started to become safer and pregnancy started to become safer and people had more bodily autonomy. And so like now I cannot watch this without
There's another piece that I think is even more intentional because the book came out after this. Remember that Reagan, the name of Reagan, is shared by the former president, Ronald Reagan, who at the time of the book's writing and film was the governor of California. Governor Ronald Reagan signed into law the first no-fault divorce in this country, legislation, in 1970. Chris is a divorced woman and her child is this out of control person that needs the church to come in and bring her into shape. So I feel like there's this very there's this kind of like running subtext, I think, about this commentary on kind of the state of the world and like the evils of things. And it's not this pearl clutching thing. Blatty is very good at like avoiding that kind of thing, but just these kind of like running themes of leaving it up for us to kind of make those connections, as many good authors are really good at. But just kind of like bringing this to the table and presenting it and being like, now what do you make of this? What is this book saying about this?
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it.
I think that comes along, Blatty also feels a lot of ways like a documentary fiction writer in the same way Friedkin had his basis in documentary film, where instead of presenting an agenda, they kind of just say, well, here's what it is. Here's what it was like. It's very realistic to the early 1970s, this thing that happened, right? There weren't powerful women in the Catholic Church in 1973, right? And so it feels a lot like, are we saying that the creators of this product themselves are anti-feminist, which is a legit argument to make, or are they presenting something how it was at their time?
Yeah.
Right.
The interesting thing to note is that, again, because we have this true story thing, the true story that supposedly inspired this whole thing was a possessed boy.
Yeah. That's
And
the
so
thing.
there's the intentional purpose And so that's where we can say that, yes, this was, maybe it was a choice to separate from the true story in the first place. But once you make that choice, you have to make other choices.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where these other critiques legitimize and come into play.
Yeah. And I think there is a certain extent to which it's a false binary, right? Like between,
Definitely.
is it their anti-feminism or are they just steeped in it? Yeah. Like it is the time and it is the culture, and also like I cannot watch the movie without, like, if it were someone who could get pregnant making that film, it would have
Yeah.
been different. Right? I think about
Oh,
it
yeah.
similarly to like the movies that I've watched where Jordan Peele is the director, the producer, the writer, like involved in it basically at all. Right? Like the perspective is different and the horror is different. Instead of the
Yep.
horror being the girl, the horror 100% would have been Marin and Karis trying to
Oh, yeah.
exercise her. And so like that piece I'm like, no, it, like there is an aspect to the film itself that is anti-feminist, anti-choice. And there, I'm glad we're having this conversation because I think it's really helpful to like tease out, because if I had just been watching it by myself, mostly paying attention, putting laundry away at the one spot where I would have jump scared, like I might not have like picked up on all of those things. But that's why we don't watch it alone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, and it's less scary when we are
And
not watching
Oh,
things
yeah.
alone.
Well,
But that other
well,
people pick it up.
look at where the help me happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's not on her face. That's already messed up.
Yeah.
It's not on the soft part of her inner arm where it could have been just as much. It's on her abdomen.
Yep.
It's rising. It's rising skin, rising flesh on that part of her body. That is very intentional.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it was probably also the easiest place to make that effect happen.
But
But
you can't make that choice.
when you make one
Yep.
choice, you have to make another choice.
Yep.
And so it is in that way very intentional.
Yeah.
So,
there's
and I think, you know, again, a person could deal with, you know, male puberty issues, right? That could have
Mm-hmm.
been a choice. It would be a very different film
Mm-hmm.
again, right? So, as creators, right? I'm a horror writer. I make certain choices, and you know, sometimes I make a choice because, well, this just sounded the best. And then I go, well, maybe that wasn't the best choice. Later on, I got to go, well, that might not have been the best choice. Or certain story elements and ideas where it's like, okay, that made a really cool story. Wow. Where was your head at where you wrote that? Not in like you're a bad person kind of headspace, but like,
Something was.
what were you
Yeah.
thinking at that
Yeah.
time?
Yeah.
Like, I know that in some of my work in my younger years, yeah, I wrote female main character rape revenge stories. And I feel kind of bad about that. Like, I didn't know as much at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a lot of those movies. I read a lot of those stories. Like, I'm going to write one of those too. Let me see how I would do it. Blah, 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 blah. Like, one of my favorite stories I ever wrote, I wrote after watching Kill Bill. It's like, I can do that. Watch me. Blah, 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 blah. And it's a story that I love, but it doesn't necessarily feel as authentic and like maybe a story that I should be proud of, but I still have to own because I did it.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's the same
And
thing with these creators. They still, I mean, Blatty and Friedkin are dead. So their ownership
Yeah.
period is kind of over. But at the time, like, no, you made those choices.
and
You have to, whatever your intent was at the time, you still have to own the
and
result.
Blatty,
Yeah.
to be clear, was a Roman Catholic, practiced it throughout his entire life, and in 2012, he died 2019, I want to say, so like near the end of his life,
Mhm.
he filed an official canon law petition, official complaint against his alma mater, against Georgetown University, for allowing pro-abortion speakers to come in and teach at that university or present at that university. So like he very much has bought
There's
into
very-
the Catholic teaching
Yeah.
on abortion and stuff like that. And I think that's
Oh yeah.
definitely at play in some of this as well.
Yeah.
He has like 7 kids too, so it's like he clearly
He definitely was
Yeah.
not about the abortion.
But
Well,
Populating the
yeah,
but there's
I think
oh god, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think that what you're saying, TJ, is really important. We unintentionally on Nerds at Church did a series on forgiveness and vengeance and hurt and harm and abuse and all of those things this fall because it was the readings that we were given with the Revised Common Lectionary, which is what we follow. But one of the gifts of that is that we had Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg on, and she literally wrote the book on forgiveness. But really, what she wrote the book on was it's called On Repentance and Repair. And we can put in our show notes the link that gives you 10% off if you buy it on Bookshop. But part of it's like so much of what she talks about are in the steps of like what you have to do is acknowledging the harm you did,
Mm-hmm.
working to repair the harm, and only after those two are at minimum started, if not well underway, then you can apologize. And I feel like that is so much part of what you're saying, that like, yeah, we've all done things that are harmful. Pastor Carla Christopher, who's a friend of the podcast, said in a sermon the other day, like, if you have moments of cringe in your past, that is a good sign. It means that you have learned and grown since then, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening to Billy Porter's audiobook right now, which is phenomenal, and the first ever audiobook that I'm like, I want the audiobook to be mine, not just the library copy. But Billy Porter talks about when you know better, you do better, which I think originally comes from Maya Angelou, right? Know better, do better. Yeah, we all have done shitty things, especially white people have done shitty things in our history, right? Like, I have some Halloween costumes that I wore as a kid because I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And now I
And look, the
know,
truth is, I'm probably going to do something shitty tomorrow. I don't know what it is,
right?
Mhm.
And then,
but it'll be something new
Yeah.
shitty.
right, it'll be like a different kind of shitty. And then when you learn that you've done something shitty, you're going to know better and you're going to do better and you are going to try to repair the harm that you've done. Like, that is the process of being human and in relationships of care with other humans, whether we know who we're in relationship with or not, but to care about the tangible and the theoretical other in our lives. Yeah. Yeah. So I just wanted to like affirm.
Yep. Nope. Good stuff. And like the other thing is, I don't think, obviously we can't just erase the history either,
Mhm.
even if we've apologized for it.
Yeah.
Right? It still has to be there, not necessarily for the apologizer, perpetrator to continue to learn, unless they still need to,
Mm-hmm.
but for other people to learn from too.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's the reason why you can watch old Disney and Looney Tunes cartoons, and it starts now with, hey, this is how this was.
Mhm.
It sucks that people were like this, and we're going to acknowledge that, and let's actually have a conversation
Mm-hmm.
instead of, no, we're
just gonna keep on doing
Yeah.
without any question.
This actually came up. My son, he's 10. We just started watching, like binge watching The Simpsons with him,
Ooh.
and we noticed, because we're watching it on Disney Plus, and my wife noticed that she made some joke about referencing the Michael Jackson episode, and our son was like, we didn't watch that one, but we should have, because we're watching them all in order, start to we're in season 6 right now, and they've taken it off. It's not on Disney Plus. And so we looked it up, because that's what we do, because we're both academic journalists and all that kind of stuff. And the producers, specifically, their quote from it is, yeah, that was a chapter of her life, and we're in charge, and so we can delete any chapter we want. Okay? Yes, you can,
And also,
but now you've eliminated the conversation. Like you've ended
yeah,
why you would do that.
acknowledging and explaining, and yeah.
Yeah. And I think some acknowledgement of the situation would have been stronger,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I have a Halloween song station, and my son likes to sing along with Thriller. And we got to say, hey, like, here's this whole other thing. You can still enjoy this song. I'm going to let you enjoy this song because I like Vincent
Yep.
Price. We're going to get to the end and everything's going to be okay. And you know why some people wouldn't enjoy this song. But now in that regard, we don't get that. And I think also with this film and book, there was never any acknowledgement. Like Friedkin, I just watched his documentary Leap of Faith again last night, where he's spends more than an hour alone just talking about the movie.
Whew.
There's no acknowledgement of
Yeah.
any of this stuff that we've just talked about. There's and without an acknowledgement, there's not any. Hey, maybe I could have done better. It is him very literally saying, "This is the most impactful movie I've ever made," which is I think is true. This is the best movie I've ever made, which is up for debate among some people. Some people like the French Connection better. I don't know. And basically saying no one's ever going to make another movie like this, so I'm the best that there ever was, and go screw yourself, everybody else, right? So there's no acknowledgement of any of this kind of stuff from him as a filmmaker, and now he's dead, so we don't get to ask him.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, it's tricky. And we've talked about that. The origins of Nerds at Church was HP at Church, and it was all about Harry Potter. And we stopped because I couldn't handle it, particularly as a trans person. But the just like the ways, and I think there's two ways of engaging, right? We as a podcast and as our like podcast family do our best not to reference Harry Potter, not to engage with Harry Potter stuff, because J.K. Rowling has explicitly said that engagement is support for
Mm-hmm.
her very harmful, transphobic, racist, white supremacist views. And so like that is both a hard choice because I loved Harry Potter and such an easy choice, right? When you say that my support of you is saying that your position's okay, yeah, no, I'm not going to support you. And there's others where they've died or they've changed or like those sorts of things where it's more complicated and more nuanced to say, like, how do we navigate a world where everybody has done harm? Everybody has some amount of problematic stuff. And like some people do more harm than others, right? But we still have to navigate as our own selves where we are drawing those lines of,
Yep.
okay, I'm not going to engage anymore. I don't want to engage with Bette Midler, and that means no more Hocus Pocus, and it sucks. And there are other things, yeah.
Yeah.
Or this person who
Right.
like has
Like,
grown and changed and acknowledged that and started to do better. And how do we encourage
yeah.
that?
Like earlier in this episode, I briefly mentioned Seven. I feel bad about that because of that particular actor in that film. Like he's the villain, so maybe that's a little bit better, but I don't know. It's still like how do I watch this thing that I loved knowing what we know now? Like, but I think one of the great things about The Exorcist as a film right now is that we can still watch it and say, look, here's the problem. And additionally say this issue of this fear of changing female bodies in particular makes the film more effective because it does two things. It says um, it's normal for bodies to change. Like like the film doesn't say that. The film says changing bodies are horrifying, but then we get because of that we can have the conversation like, no, you're not suddenly possessed by a demon. You're just going through puberty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Happens to everyone. And we can also say to the men watching the film, who might include myself as, of going, what are you so afraid of?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's horrifying. Why? Why is that the thing that you're afraid of? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and that
Which now
And
makes
so
me
you
want
get
to
to do that.
require everyone to watch Red, the Disney animated show,
Oh, I love that movie.
alongside
That was so
this,
much
right?
so good.
Because it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah, that would be fantastic.
right, and I think that would be such an interesting
double feature
conversation between those two films.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
I have one more deep divey thing, which is the queerness of the film and the book, which I just find fascinating. In the movie, Dyer is clearly queer coded. This life of the party,
Oh yeah.
this priest, but queer coded, who's the life of the party, who's singing, who's playing piano. He has a lot of gay affects and
Without music,
mannerisms. Go ahead, sorry.
playing
Yep,
without music, he's just playing
yep.
from memory.
Also, he's an actual priest who
Yes.
played an actual
Yeah.
There
priest.
are several priests that appear in this movie. Actual priests.
Yeah, I'm
which
like
I
looking
love.
at the Wikipedia right now, and it's
He
like
is-
there are two people who are like Father so and so
Yep,
playing
he is
Father
one of them.
something else.
Another one is Thomas Birmingham, who was
Yep.
a technical
Tom
advisor
Callahan.
to the film, so a little bit behind the scenes there. So that he's one of the ones who like helped make sure like the stoles are the right color, because this is during Lent, right before Easter, when they're doing so they're playing on their purple stoles.
I
and
always
stuff like
wonder
that.
who makes, because there's so many movies that don't.
And then he also appears as he was
Father
the president
Tom Canavan,
Yeah.
the president of Georgetown University.
So but also in the book, one of the insults is not, or the attacks that the demon makes on Marin, which is not brought into the film, is calling Marin a homosexual. And for that to be an effective insult, as we've learned about the ways that the demon insults people in the book up to that point, there's some truth to that. So like so it's clearly a struggle that Marin has. Is not commented on or anything, but it's just kind of brought up as part of the color of the character in the demon's attack on Marin. So it's interesting that there are I think it's part of recognizing the reality of the Catholic Church and how many priests are gay. And I want to reference the book The Silence of Sodom by Mark D. Jordan, who there's this quote that I love in it. Mark D. Jordan is a former Catholic priest who's an academic, brilliant scholar, brilliant Foucault scholar and stuff like that, and historian. But he was stripped of his priesthood stuff before being gay. And so one of his ways of getting back to the church is writing this book called The Silence of Sodom that explores basically the ways in which the Catholic Church from the early medieval period up until now, regardless of how many priests are actually gay or any of that stuff, the Catholic Church has benefited from and continues to benefit from the contributions of queer people, and especially gay men who are in the priesthood and have the power to make decisions. And there are a lot of lesbians and like nuns and lesbian nuns and stuff like that, but they don't have that same decision making power in the Catholic Church as the gay priests do. So the fact that the Catholic Church in itself is kind of this like so perhaps Friedkin and Blatty are kind of recognizing the fact that there's like queerness in the Catholic Church. Just kind of like as that documentarian style of like, this is a reality. There you'll come across priests like this who are gay or stuff, or maybe there's a deeper statement in there. The fact that
they all end up dead.
Well, Dyer doesn't end up dead.
Well, one of the things in the novel, one of the things Karras says in his role as psychiatrist to this group of priests is that he is afraid of the next priest that's going to walk into his office and confess to him that they're gay. He doesn't want to have to deal with it, right? And so when the interesting thing you said there, Pace, is that the demon always includes some element of truth in the insults. And so we have to kind of make, extend that out. One of the things in the novel again is that Karras's mom was poor and like impoverished poor, where he was ashamed of his classmates catching her digging through trash for whatever she might have found. The implication, of course, from the demon is that there's a possibility that in her impoverished state that she also occasionally prostituted herself. So
Hmm.
Yeah.
aren't the insults aren't designed to attack the person the insults are necessarily about, but about the person they're being spoken to,
Yeah.
right? So
It's the like, what
so
is your insecurity? How do you pull those out?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so the insult to Marin isn't necessarily about himself dealing with potential homosexual urges, but that he shunned people who were dealing with that and did not comfort them when he should have in his role as a priest, and instead pushed them
And
away.
that kind of is part of the fascinating thing about this movie, in the ways in which it is anti-feminist, as you said, are very misogynistic, and yet also has this space for this like queerness to just be a fabric of the Catholic Church and the fabric of the world around it, without it being something that's commented on, good or bad. It's just part of Marin. It's part of Dyer. And so for a 1973 film, especially from a uh, very traditional kind of Catholic uh, theological lens, to have that space, I just think is really cool and fascinating. And one of the things I've always kind of felt as a queer kid growing up, just kind of helped connect this film to me, and see space for
Yep.
people.
Well, and the accusation is it's not just among the priests either. Kinderman asks about Dennings before he died. Oh, was he before he came to the house? Wasn't he drunk controlling the bars on M Street?
Yeah.
And that's not in the movie. That's in the
Mm-hmm.
book. So even Kinderman tries to explore like what was Dennings doing before he came over to the house before he died. So yeah, it's all like it's horrible things to reckon with, but necessary.
That's all I had for the deep dive. Anybody else have anything before we get to rating and favorite kills and all that fun stuff?
Not unless you want to go for another hour.
I know. I was gonna say we could dive
We could
into mental
keep
illness
going
and stigma
forever,
and
but
all of that, but we might have to save that for another night.
yeah. And uh, now I feel like I have to say something. Real quick, real quick. One of the things I like about this movie and the book is that it pushes against something that I find so obnoxious in progressive modern Christian circles, of saying that the people that Jesus cured were suffering from mental illness. They were not actually possessed by demons. And I'm like, A, there's no fucking way you can know that. That text was written 2,000 years ago, without any lens towards without any modern or contemporary understanding of mental illness. And B, it undermines the reality of evil in the world, and puts it into mental illness, as opposed to saying there's this outside evilness that we're all entangled in, something that I would call things um, like white supremacy and stuff, that these nets that we're entangled in, these evil things that we're entangled in, but instead it turns that into these outside things we have no control over, turns it into diagnoses for these people that Jesus was supposedly possessing. And the fact of the matter is that the authors of the New Testament, truly believe that this was a supernatural occurrence, and this is proof of Jesus's divinity. And also, if Jesus is curing people of mental illness, what does that say from a disabled or mentally ill point of view about the end goal of mental illness as something that needs to be cured, as opposed to something that can be lived with, or something that shouldn't be stigmatized and stuff like that? So sorry, I know you're going to go into some of that too, Emily, but I just
Apology
had to
rejected.
just throw that out there. So I do like that in this movie of like, no, it's not just mental illness.
I loved that. Yeah, I loved that Chris was like, "Hell no, my daughter is not going to be sent to an asylum." Like, we know for a fact that institutionalizing people with mental illnesses causes more harm. Like,
Mhm.
we know that.
Ooh,
Well, that's the thing in the book. She was institutionalized for like
Yep.
2 months and didn't get better.
Yep. And I want to shout out the Halloween episodes from season 1 where I just do not talk about Foucault anymore on this podcast, and I really need to change that.
It's almost like you've moved on. You've grown. You've become a new base.
But like Foucault is so central to queer theology and stuff,
Yeah,
and so I
but
just
go
love
deeper.
it.
Go further back than Foucault.
But that's the thing is like Foucault's discussion of institutionalization and how and kind of his genealogical method, which is my method for doing history as well. So I'm going to push back and say no. I feel like I need to bring Foucault back on more. I talk about Luther too much, but anyway.
I mean, just pick somebody who's not a dead white guy, and then I'll be fine. That's all I'm pushing towards.
But
fewer dead white guys.
But
I say that in my classes too, and then I stand in front of them and say, "Hey, look at me, straight white guy. I'm alive though. Don't listen to people like me, except for me."
Yeah.
Right.
And then acknowledge that that's an issue.
Yeah. And here I'm going to give you all the resources of people who are not cis white guys.
Foucault is not het. He's very much identifies as a gay man.
I did not say het.
B, I would debate, of course, contemporary understanding in his time of gender is not something. There differences of terminology and stuff like that. But I would debate strongly that he is cis. I do not think he was cis or identified as cis.
Okay, but I said dead white guys. And I do think he classifies under that.
A guy? If he's not fully cis?
I think he can still classify under that.
Okay.
Based on like contextual stuff. Yes, I think he can also not be cis, and his gender can be part of the larger histories of gender that we tell. And also,
I don't want to erase the very, very few queer people of.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get you more towards like the living ones.
Well, I mean, I talk about Butler a lot too, Judith Butler and stuff, and she's a queer scholar. I just talked about Mark D. Jordan. He's still alive. He's see, I talk about them all. But Foucault,
I know, but you're like, oh, I should bring up this dead one again.
Because his work is so relevant. It's like, oh my god. Anyway, we're gonna continue this debate forever.
I'm just poking you at this point.
Oh, I know. I love my Foucault. I leave it at that. I think I would love Foucault even more than Luther. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. Why aren't you
writing your dissertation on Foucault?
He's in my dissertation. I mean, his method is my method I'm using for my dissertation, his genealogical method. So I'm using Foucault to read Luther. Anyway.
That feels so very on brand.
You've heard. We are now nearing hour 3. We have not had an episode this long in like 2 seasons, so I'm kind of impressed with us. I'm happy. And what a movie to do on it. Honestly, we could do a whole series.
We talked about making this episode 2 episodes anyway, so
yes, but it's not going to be because I'm too lazy.
Somewhere in there might be a natural break. I don't know.
No, I'm not doing it. It's just going to be a long episode. Yeah. Listeners, at this point, you're at the end, so this advice is no longer helpful. But take breaks. Like, you can pause. If you think the episode's too long, just fucking pause. Come back to it another time. You're welcome. You don't need to complain about being too long.
Indeed. Speaking of terrible transitions.
Yes.
Let's rate this film.
Let's do it.
So, out of 10 spinning heads, what are we rating it?
We're bloody crucifixes.
Oh. That's a whole different one. I can do spinning heads. I don't know if I'm ready to rate it out of bloody crucifixes.
That's fair. we can start with our guest to give Pace and Emily time to figure it out, because you already put your rating in there. So go for it.
It's like it's an 11 out of 10 for me. This is my favorite movie, and even the complicated issues surrounding it, and that we got into, like, really just scratching the surface on here, actually make me like it more, because it's never going to be the same movie anytime I watch it. So I'm going to watch it again. I bought the 4K Blu-ray. I'm going to watch it
That's on
again,
my list to
and it's going to
buy.
be a different movie than the movie I watched last week when I watched it before this. And I love that about it. And not every movie can do that. So it's an 11 out of 10.
Nice.
Maybe that's cheating, but I don't
It's
care.
not. It's not cheating. Favorite kill?
My favorite kill is Marin's off-screen death, because we don't know, and I love the mystery. Like we've talked about, we're set up to believe he just had a heart attack, but with Reagan being unstrapped and smiling and giggling, something else happened. We don't know what it is. We'll never know what it was, and I love that.
Yeah. I am going to rate it a 7 out of 10. Spinning Heads. I do think it's a very effective film. It is scary. It does its thing, all of that. And also I like it's so anti-feminist and like so I will give it a 7. Which feels a little generous, to be honest, but also I don't know. And I am going to stray from my usual way of picking a favorite death, which is whoever's the biggest asshole. And I'm going to say Damien. I really like that there is a sacrificial death that is not done by a woman, because that is rare. And I think it is this like beautiful him reckoning with his own beliefs and commitments and all of that, and then being like, you know what, I want this girl to live, and this is the way to do it. This is the way that she lives, and this is the way that the demon then is destroyed. So
I dig that.
Base.
Okay, I will rate it 9 spinning heads and 1 partially obscured bloody crucifix, for a total rating of 9.5. This to me still remains, from an atmospheric perspective, from a character perspective, and from just like its cultural impact, like all the things, a near perfect film for me. Perfect is hard to get. Like Halloween, I would say, is the perfect film for me. John Carpenter, the original, but this is a near perfect film. I just love and how it sticks with me, and how it created a whole single-handedly created a whole genre of Exorcist films, most of which suck, but occasionally we get a good one. And then they're still coming out 50 years later. We have at least like 2 Exorcist films a year in the horror genre.
But nobody's adapted my book yet.
Right?
Bastards.
For all you Halloween...
all of our listeners.
Yeah, all of you Hollywood producers who are listeners, please adapt the fantastic books of T.J. Tranchell. But
okay, but if anybody does, because they heard us on this podcast, dibs on a cameo appearance.
Right.
Oh, all of us. Yeah, I want a cameo.
Okay, perfect.
Right, I just want to Hitchcock it across the street.
I want a Spike Lee kind of cameo. Like, I want like a one-liner, a good, solid one-liner.
Little fourth wall break.
Yeah. Ooh, there you go. There you go. My favorite death.
Kill.
I don't know.
I mean, there's not that many to choose from.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah, I don't really have a favorite kill in this one. I would say, I guess my favorite kill is probably Marin's off-screen death, especially after we learn his backstory in Exorcist: The Beginning, and just because someone deserves to die for those films, and it might as well be Mary. But
that's a perfect way of not spoiling it for me. Thank you.
But no, here's the thing.
Ugh.
I love those movies as bad as they are. I will watch the hell out of the two prequel, Dominion and Exorcist: The Beginning. I will watch a hell of them. I will. No marathon of the Exorcist trilogy or franchise, not trilogy, is complete without watching those movies, and they are also atrocities and absolutely awful. So.
But you still can't get
Pace.
more than 15 minutes into the 9th configuration.
Do you love it this much? This is the novelization of Exorcist: The
I
Beginning.
didn't know there was a novelization.
And guess what? It also sucks.
Not surprised.
It's a little bit better than the movie, but it
Books
also
usually
sucks.
are.
This is, more of an artifact for keeping rather than something to be read
I love
and
it.
enjoyed.
I love it. Yeah. And the backstory of those movies as well. Definitely check out TJ's article in Fangoria about some of the backstory, but it is not as rare as you would think. Because Superman 2 has also done this. Justice League has done this, where the new one, Zack Snyder verse, where basically they shoot a movie, it's not testing well, or the execs are upset with it or something, so they reshoot a movie or bring in a different director, reshoot it, and the reshot version sucks.
Is
It's
worse.
And so then they
I
finally,
feel like it always is worse.
but then they come back and bring out the original that was originally shot, and you're like, but this also sucks. It's like, it's a no-win situation. They both suck.
You can get a DVD with both of them on it. That's what I have. And it's like, let's look at the acknowledgement of the suckage. Like, we're just gonna be like, yeah, oops, here it is.
So
That's fantastic.
yeah, just
Watch, if you do, for the audience, if you get this DVD set of Exorcist Dominion and Exorcist The Beginning, watch them with the director commentaries.
Ooh.
Paul Schrader did Dominion, and your boy Rennie Harlan did The Beginning, and you kind of really get a sense of that perspective we started with, because Rennie Harlan wanted to make an action movie. The Beginning is much more of an action movie, whereas Schrader wanted to make a 70s movie, and so there's more there. It's slower.
Huh.
There's more introspection. It is also much more theological. There's a really great Saint Sebastian moment in Dominion that is not in The Beginning. So
Okay.
non like casual fans, just skip
Yeah.
it. Both of them. Just don't
until we cover it on this podcast.
But if you really want to know, do it. Yeah, if you're listening to this, you're
Yeah.
gonna do it, right? You're gonna do it.
I don't know. I mean, I will, but only
maybe not
like
you,
in a
Emily.
couple seasons.
Yeah.
Just don't
yeah.
talk it up too much, otherwise Pace is going to be convinced that we should do it next season, and
No,
I don't think
we
I'm
already
ready
have
for
our
that.
next season planned out, I'm pretty sure, which
That's
is going to
true.
be witches. But the season after that, no, kidding. Oh my goodness, what a fun episode! Thank you so much, TJ,
Also,
for joining us.
I had zero jump
yes.
scares this episode. I would have probably had one, but I was putting away laundry I had folded when it happened. But I was like, oh, that would have probably gotten
It's
me.
not a jump scare movie.
Yeah, it's not a bunch.
It's more about discomfort. Like my favorite, the closest thing to a jump scare for me in this is when Reagan shows up and pees all over the floor, because it comes out of nowhere. Like, you don't expect that that's what's going to happen, and then suddenly here's this girl in her blue nightie pissing all over the floor in the middle of a fancy party, and that's discomforting. It's uncomfortable. You go, oh, okay, that's the kind of movie this is going to be. All right.
Yeah.
So, congratulations, Emily, on not having jump scares during a non-jump scare movie. Kind of like when we were covering Nightmare on Elm Street, and you were so proud of yourself for not having jump scares. I'm like, this isn't really a jump scare franchise until we
And
get
then
to the
movies,
remake, which was.
Well, yeah.
But anyway.
That was a different story. I'm assuming Pace did not have any jump scares.
No. But I've also seen this movie so many times that I'm not quite at like the quoting it from memory as I am with some movies, but probably another dozen times watching this I will be. One of these days I'll have to tell the real life church horror story about Pace in this movie, but we don't have time for this. But I'll just tease that for all of you listeners to be like waiting with bated breath till we finally get there. Okay. But anyway, thank you so much, TJ. This was fantastic. Yes. Do you have any upcoming...
I had a good time.
Do you have any upcoming projects? Do you have any social media handles or anything you want to shout out?
I'm the easiest person to find on social media because there's only one of me. We're dialing down the app formerly known as Twitter. So I'm on the Threads and the Blue Sky and the Instagram. Easy to find. You just have to search my name and there I will be.
Yay!
I'm also, of course, on the web, tjtranchell.net. And the thing I need people to do right now is I'm doing pre-orders for a hardcover limited edition omnibus of my entire Black Hawk cycle, which includes Tell No Man, the Possession book, but will also include a previously unpublished novella that is a prequel to all of those, and another unpublished short story. So, and then it's going to come with goodies and all that. Yeah. But I'm only doing 113 copies. So if you want that, you should get on that.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a fancy dust jacket hardback. It's going to end up being like 600 pages long.
Wow.
I'm pretty happy with it.
That's awesome. Yeah. So check it out.
Yeah.
Please.
And our next episodes are going to be the 100th episode spectacular with some version of Q&A and who knows what else. Send us your questions.
Sometime in November.
And yeah, it'll happen in November because also in November is going to be From a Certain Point of View, Empire Strikes Back, our discussion of the second book of the From a Certain Point of View series, which are Star Wars novel short story collection things that are delightful and I love them, having only read one so far, but I'm excited to dig into the second one.
Yes.
Yeah. So again, thank you, TJ, and thank you, dear listeners. That is it for our show. Our theme music was by Matt May. Horror Nerds at Church releases every Thursday-ish. Please comment, rate, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, which is going away and becoming YouTube, I don't know what, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Support us on Patreon and get access to exclusive movie commentary episodes, BooTube episodes, and more bonus content by going to patreon.com/horrornerdsatchurch. It starts at only $5 to sign up, so cheaper than flying somebody out for an exorcism. Follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at Horror Nerds at Church, and Twitter and Blue Sky at HNACPOD for all the latest updates about upcoming films, news, and other announcements. Until next time, don't let your kids stay in a room by themselves without you with priests. Don't pick up strange artifacts in the desert.
Don't be Paul Bateson and a radiological technician and be a background character in The Exorcist and then go out and be a serial killer.
Yeah, murder, bad. Yes. You say it all the time on Nerds at Church. Bring it here to Horror Nerds at Church. Murder, bad. In real life, don't be a serial killer. Can't believe we have to say this.
Yay.